What's up, everyone? In this episode, we are examining a collection of the most baffling, unexplained events and park ranger disappearances on record. So pour a fresh cup of coffee, dim the lights, and settle in. If you're watching this from the safety of your porch, enjoy the crisp night air while it lasts. Now, let's head into the wild.
Story time.
Alright, my video from yesterday about park rangers performed remarkably well. So I thought, why not do another one? As you can see, our views are low and algorithm threw us into Underworld, so every support is appreciated until we return to our old glory. Okay, now, let's go. Every single ranger who disappeared was wearing a state-of-the-art GPS tracker, and all mentioned in this video blinked out of existence at the exact same time, in completely different parts of the woods. I have brought over $100,000 worth of thermal cameras, night vision drones, and survival gear to track down their last known locations. Okay, I didn't, but you get the shtick. Here is the catch. The locals say that whatever took those rangers is still out there, and after the sun goes down, this entire forest completely changes.
Story time.
Park Ranger Paul Fugate. Next, we have the unsettling case of Park Ranger Paul Fugate. Here is yet another truly tragic account of a park ranger vanishing mysteriously while performing his daily duties, never to be seen or heard from again. Now, Paul was known to be a bit of a rebel. He was anti-establishment, to the point where he actually stayed for weeks at a time in a small cobblestone cabin located directly on site at the monument. He worked as a naturalist. His duties involved small menial tasks like answering the questions of visitors and putting together various trail guides. Originally, Paul had worked at the Navajo Monument down in Arizona. He was transferred shortly after facing disciplinary action from a boss regarding his laziness and his generally slovenly appearance. Apparently, the supervisor admitted in a later official report that he was highly annoyed he could not technically fire Paul outright. He also explicitly stated he deeply resented the so-called hippies who kept coming in to work for the monument. Paul was eventually charged with stealing government equipment. This happened when he took some hay home to feed his wife's horse. Speaking of his personal life, he was in an open relationship with his wife. He was actively sleeping with multiple women who also happened to be his co-workers. While all of this background information may seem totally irrelevant at a glance, we must look at absolutely every possible aspect of a person's life when they vanish under such profoundly strange circumstances. This is especially true when professionals in this specific field are seemingly disappearing at an alarming rate. It has been happening for quite a while now. Before he abandoned his post that fateful day, he left specific instructions. He told the only other staff member present that if he was not back by a certain time, they should just go ahead and close up without him. He then walked out the door. He headed down towards a specific tract of land the park was in the process of acquiring. This was an area shrouded in complex problems, you know? There had been significant ongoing conflict concerning this 400-acre purchase with the local Apache tribe. Again, after walking toward that disputed land, he was never seen and heard from. No body has ever been discovered.
Story time.
Ranger Brendan Unit. Let us first look at Ranger Brendan Unit. He was attached to the Larimer County, Colorado Department of Natural Resources. Ranger Brendan Unit was just 27 years old when he went missing. He was out actively searching at night for a missing boater. Well, there has actually been nothing reported about the ultimate results regarding that initial missing person, one Brendan was out looking for in the first place. What we do know is that a sudden, severe high wind event apparently caused him to capsize in his boat. He died of what was officially ruled as freshwater drowning. I mean, I am definitely no expert, but what I do know a lot about is strange weather events and causes of death that simply do not fit the season or the specific profession the victim happened to be in. I am definitely not the only one pointing this out either. Many people are wondering how a seasoned, professional outdoorsman could just capsize and drown so easily. And what about this so-called strange high wind event? Why does there always seem to be a sudden, violent change in the weather right during one of these missing persons encounters? These are the exact things many of us in this community wonder about. We see case after case. The same pattern repeats over and over again. Yet we are left completely without definitive answers or even sensible explanations.
Story time.
Park Ranger Jeff Christensen. In July of 2005, another seasonal park ranger died under incredibly mysterious circumstances. And it happened right in the exact same county where Brendan Unit passed away. Jeff Christensen was simply conducting a routine backcountry patrol of the Lake Lawn trailhead when he allegedly lost his footing. He fell from Mummy's Range, located in Rocky Mountain National Park over in Larimer County, Colorado. The frantic search for the initially missing ranger dragged on for a little over a week. Ultimately, he was found on August 6, 2005 by a civilian hiker. The official cause of death was listed as a left temporal skull fracture, which subsequently led to a subdural hematoma. The ranger, officially speaking, lost his footing and perished in a tragic accidental fall. He had only been on the job for 4 years. He was survived by his grieving parents. I mean, we really have to ask, is it genuinely possible for someone with at least 4 years of hardcore backcountry experience to die from something so shockingly simple? Could it actually be that there is something out there in our national parks and vast forests deliberately hunting these rangers? Perhaps they, or it, want to take out the very people who possess the skills to help. To eliminate the trained professionals who could possibly save the other victims this mysterious predator is trying to claim, we must keep relentlessly searching for the truth. We owe it to all the people who die from incidents that seem simple on paper, things that look purely accidental, but could very well be something much more sinister.
Story time.
The final photograph of Jared Negrete. A cheap disposable camera found casually discarded on a lonely mountain trail held a haunting, terrifying secret. Its final, blurry photograph, snapped wildly in complete darkness, revealed only a lost boy's frightened eyes and nose. This eerie, unsettling self-portrait is the very last trace of 12-year-old Jared Negrete. He vanished without a trace during a Boy Scout hike back in 1991. His perplexing disappearance has baffled seasoned searchers for decades. It currently remains one of Southern California's most deeply unsettling wilderness mysteries. In July of 1991, Jared Negrete went on his very first overnight Boy Scout camping trip. He was a shy but deeply friendly 12-year-old kid from El Monte. The ambitious journey officially began on July 18th, with the troop safely camping overnight in the foothills. By the next day, as they aggressively pushed toward the daunting 11,500-foot summit, Jared physically struggled to keep up. The steep switchback trails were grueling. He eventually fell far behind the others. Rather than halt the entire group's progress to wait for him, the adult troop leader made a fateful call. He decided the faster, older hikers would just continue pushing to the summit, and they would simply pick up Jared on their way back down. Thus, Jared was left slowly walking at his own pace, utterly alone on the massive mountainside, as evening rapidly neared. Well, this is of course an extremely questionable, deeply disturbing decision in and of itself. Having the supposed leader of the expedition deliberately leaving behind one of the most physically vulnerable members. In hindsight, if this specific choice had not been made, this entire nightmare would have almost certainly been completely avoided. Some passing hikers later reported seeing the lone, exhausted boy attempting to cut straight down the steep switchbacks. They verbally urged him to stay strictly on the safely marked trail. In fact, right around 6 o'clock, one off-duty firefighter who was hiking through the area directly encountered Jared. He explicitly warned the boy not to stray off the established route. And that, tragically, was the very last confirmed sighting of the boy. When the troop finally regrouped on their rapid descent later that night, Jared was nowhere to be found. Deeply alarmed, the troop leader led the other young boys back down to base camp. He then hiked further down the dark mountain to desperately summon help. By the time proper authorities were officially notified, Jared had already been missing for several perilous hours in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. At first light on July 20th, 1991, an incredibly intensive search and rescue operation was rapidly launched. Teams of highly trained rescuers thoroughly scoured the steep mountainside on foot and on horseback. Meanwhile, loud helicopters aggressively swept the treacherous area from above. Rescuers poured in from all across Southern California. They searched relentlessly, day and night, working in exhausting rotating shifts. The terrain day was completely unforgiving. Loose rocks, slippery gravel slopes, and impossibly dense brush made absolutely every single step perilous. Mount San Gorgonio's sprawling wilderness is a dizzying maze of rocky crags and sandy switchbacks. It is filled with many confusing trails that quite literally lead to nowhere, making navigation incredibly difficult even for highly experienced veteran hikers. Just a few steps off the established paths, one can easily be swept violently into a deep ravine or end up entirely obscured by the thick vegetation native to this treacherous region. Despite the clear dangers, officials initially held on tightly to hope. The summer weather was relatively mild, and fresh, drinkable water was readily available from the mountain streams. Within just 2 days, searchers found the first tangible clues. On July 21st, footprints strongly believed to match Jared's distinct sneakers were suddenly spotted around the 10,000-foot level of the massive mountain. This critical discovery helped rapidly narrow the team's focus down to a specific, manageable zone of the wilderness. Shortly afterward, search teams discovered torn pieces of beef jerky and some discarded candy wrappers. These were highly likely dropped by Jared during his disoriented hike. A full week into the grueling effort, on July 27th, the most significant, chilling find was made. Jared's disposable Kodak camera. It was lying casually in the dirt, about 50 feet completely off the Vivian Creek Trail. When the film was carefully developed by investigators, they found 12 photos on the roll. Most were just standard scenic shots taken before Jared went missing. But the final frame was a startling, horrifying enigma. It was a blurry, extreme close-up of Jared's own face, just his wide eyes and his nose. It was taken late at night, illuminated only by the camera's harsh, sudden flash. At some point after his disappearance, the terrified boy had pointed the plastic camera right at himself and snapped a picture, alone in the pitch dark. Family members who later viewed this deeply unsettling last photo fully believed that Jared looked incredibly frightened in it. It provided a chilling, final glimpse of his terrifying ordeal out on the mountainside. With these fresh clues in hand, authorities tightly concentrated their efforts directly below the spot where Jared was last seen. Dozens of dedicated searchers combed meticulously through muddy creek beds, thorny thickets, and dangerous rocky drop-offs in that specific area. They went inch by agonizing inch. At one point, a discarded blue water bottle was found in the brush. This briefly raised everyone's hopes, but it was later confirmed not to have actually belonged to Jared. Over the next 2 agonizing weeks, the operation massively grew. It transformed into the largest search in San Bernardino County history. As many as 3,000 people in total participated in the effort, covering up to 50 square miles of rugged wilderness in their exhaustive, desperate hunt. Eager volunteers, armed sheriff's deputies, seasoned forest rangers, and even National Guard troops all actively joined forces in the massive effort. Jared's heartbroken mother, Linda, actually hiked right into the rough search area alongside the authorities. She was fiercely determined to help find any sign of her lost son. Yet despite the remarkably clear weather and a massive all-out push by thousands, not a single additional trace of the boy ever emerged. After 16 agonizing days of exhaustive searching, officials made the profoundly painful decision. They called off the official search on August 4th, 1991. By then, the statistical chance of finding Jared alive was officially deemed virtually zero. Authorities had to grimly presume the young boy had perished. Veteran rescuers remarked in contemporary somber interviews with the LA Times that novice hikers often get lost in these sprawling mountains, sure, but rarely do they just disappear completely without leaving a single trace. In Jared's sad case, sadly, that is exactly what happened. He was simply gone, leaving his devastated family and the exhausted searchers with absolutely nothing to do but constantly wonder how and why. In the total absence of a definitive answer, several theories have naturally been put forward to explain his baffling disappearance. Investigators as well as family members have deeply pondered these dark possibilities, but without any new, physical evidence, none can be confidently confirmed. The most widely accepted logical theory is that Jared fell victim to the mountain's deeply perilous terrain. All the physical signs strongly suggest he wandered completely off the main trail, venturing blindly into an unsafe area while desperately trying to find his own way down alone. If he slipped suddenly on the loose rocks, or blindly stepped over a hidden ledge in the fading evening light, he could have easily tumbled into a hidden ravine or a jagged crag. From there, the dense brush and the jagged, broken terrain might easily have completely concealed his broken body from the rescuers above. The sprawling wilderness has many sheer, deadly cliffs and deep gullies completely blanketed with thick vegetation. Searchers specifically noted that a person could quickly become entirely invisible if they wandered off the established path. Some officials involved directly in the search heavily speculated that Jared appeared to have attempted continued shortcutting straight down the switchbacks. This would continue until he ended at far below the safe, established trail. This specific dangerous route would have intimately involved descending into a highly difficult canyon. Notably, this was the exact same canyon where his plastic camera and those candy wrappers were later found. Under such dark, confusing conditions, it is very plausible that Jared fell or became severely injured and simply could not climb back out. The grim fact that no bodily remains or torn clothing were ever found is deeply unsettling, yes, but it could easily be due to the sheer vastness of the search area and just how thoroughly nature can quietly hide a body. This accidental misadventure scenario strongly remains the leading explanation in the eyes of those who have rigorously studied the cold case. Another dark angle considered whether someone else could have possibly been directly involved in Jared's fate. From the very start, careful investigators found zero evidence of human interference. There were absolutely no signs of a violent struggle, no suspicious footprints or discarded items, and no eyewitness reports of anyone else in the vicinity. While not entirely, completely impossible, a targeted abduction in that deeply remote setting would have been incredibly difficult to pull off without alerting the other hikers nearby. However, one specific theory suggested that perhaps Jared wandered all the way down to a public road. From there, he was picked up by an unknown, malicious individual, essentially kidnapped after miraculously surviving the initial night alone. This frightening idea was actively investigated, but authorities eventually largely dismissed it, mostly for the total lack of any corroborating clues or roadside sightings. In the very end, absolutely nothing concrete ever emerged to point toward foul play. Law enforcement's long-standing consensus has been that Jared's sudden disappearance was most likely a tragic accident, not the violent work of another person. That said, while the authorities view this as a very unlikely scenario, it remains a potential, terrifying possibility. Notably, because the rough region is home to dangerous wildlife like black bears and mountain lions, the dark possibility of a fatal animal attack was also carefully examined. However, this bloody theory was quickly deemed highly unlikely by the experts. Search teams found zero physical evidence to indicate a large bear or a stalking cougar had attacked and dragged Jared violently away. Encounters with large, hungry predators are statistically rare. They almost always leave very obvious, gory signs when they do occur. Since absolutely no such traces were found during the massive, extensive search, the wildlife theory holds very little weight compared to the other explanations. Jared's baffling disappearance completely devastated his loving family and his local community. In September of 1991, long after any real hope of finding him alive had faded, the grieving family held a solemn memorial service in his honor. To this very day, no trace of Jared Negrete has ever been recovered from the mountain. The case remains freezing cold, despite being periodically re-examined by the authorities. And yeah, just before we wrap this up, this story is just incredibly messed up. There is absolutely no valid reason this should have ever happened to young Jared. And I don't say that to imply that bad things should happen to anyone else I am covering in this channel. But I say it to point out that this tragedy was both 100% preventable and also completely obviously foreseeable. Leaving behind the absolute least physically capable member of the hike out in the wild, just so you can reach the summit a little faster, it is incredibly messed up, to say the very least.
Story time.
The disappearance of Reinhard Kirschner. In the spring of 2007, a highly seasoned adventurer set out into the wild expanse of northern Arizona. He never came back. Reinhard Kirschner was a 61-year-old physicist hailing from Germany, and he absolutely loved exploring the rugged, unforgiving landscapes of the American Southwest. He was an incredibly experienced hiker who kept himself in excellent physical shape. He had journeyed to the United States many times prior to trek through its vast deserts and deep canyons. This particular trip was supposed to be just another grand adventure. Instead, it twisted into a haunting, enduring mystery. Kirschner ventured deep into a remote sector of the Navajo Reservation. This is a place strictly defined by its deep canyons, treacherous hidden sinkholes, and generally unforgiving terrain. And he simply vanished, without a trace. Reinhard Kirschner was not some naive novice stumbling blindly into the wilderness. Back home in Germany, he maintained a highly distinguished career as a physicist, but his deep passion for adventure frequently drew him overseas. He had fallen entirely in love with the dramatic, sweeping geology of Arizona's Colorado Plateau, returning time and time again to hike its winding trails and photograph the stunning vistas. Friends and family knew him as a fit, profoundly careful outdoorsman. He was always well prepared. By the year 2007, he had amassed extensive experience in desert hiking and technical canyon exploration. He even knew this specific isolated region quite well from his prior visits. Kirschner's personal life was also in a fantastic place. He was happily engaged to be married. He was actively planning to meet up with his fiancée in Las Vegas right after concluding his hiking trip. That important rendezvous was set in stone for April 9th, 2007. Unfortunately, he would never make it to that meeting. In early April 2007, Kirschner drove his rented pickup truck deep into a truly remote section of the Navajo wilderness, out in northeastern Arizona. He was heading for an area situated near a dramatic bend of the Little Colorado River. Locals know it as Hellhole Bend. This specific region of the Colorado Plateau is characterized by massive, sheer cliffs that plummet violently into a 2,500-foot gorge. The landscape is entirely riddled with hidden sinkholes. In fact, Hellhole Bend earned its ominous moniker directly from the sheer abundance of these hellish, plunging sinkhole pits scattered across the ground. It is exactly the kind of place only the most hardened, adventurous hikers would dare go. Kirschner was certainly one of them. He parked his truck near the precipice of the canyon's rim and set off on foot. Most likely, he was aiming for a simple day hike. When April 9th finally came around and Kirschner failed to show up in Las Vegas to meet his fiancée, alarm bells immediately rang. At first, those closest to him wondered if he might have just been delayed, or perhaps he was simply stuck out of cell phone range. But as the days slowly passed with absolutely no word, it became painfully clear that something was seriously wrong. Kirschner was a highly reliable man. He kept strictly to his plans. For him to miss that critical meeting without any prior contact meant he was in deep trouble. His panicked fiancée reported him missing. Authorities sprang right into action. On April 12, 2007, diligent searchers located Kirschner's abandoned rental truck sitting near the rim of the Little Colorado River Gorge. It was parked about 2 miles away from Hellhole. The truck sat silently on a lonely, dusty dirt track by the canyon, a quiet marker indicating where he had begun his trek. There were absolutely no signs of foul play, no evidence of any potential theft at the site either. It appeared that Kirschner had simply walked off into the wild and just never come back. Finding Kirschner's truck triggered an incredibly intensive multi-agency search effort. This operation crossed various jurisdictional lines, pulling in both county and tribal authorities. Coconino County Sheriff's search and rescue teams formally joined forces with Navajo Nation officials to scour the sprawling canyon lands by both land and air. Helicopters crisscrossed the dizzying maze of cliffs and ravines from above. Meanwhile, ground teams and specialized dog units struggled immensely through the rocky, uneven terrain below. Over the course of 6 grueling days, searchers covered approximately 60 square miles surrounding Hellhole Bend. This was no small feat. The landscape there is formidable at its absolute best, and lethally problematic at its worst. The gorge of the Little Colorado River cuts deeply into the plateau. One single misstep near the edge can easily be deadly. Rescuers had to be extremely cautious to avoid becoming victims themselves. One of the biggest hazards in this area and a possible key to Kirshner's ultimate fate is the overwhelming presence of numerous limestone sinkholes. These are deep, natural pits plunging into the ground. They are often perfectly concealed by native desert scrub, making them incredibly hard to see until it is quite literally too late, especially after dusk. It is perilously easy to stumble right into one of these gaping chasms without any warning whatsoever. Search coordinators noted that many of the sinkholes located near Hellhole Bend were simply too dangerous to physically enter, so they lowered remote cameras down into the dark, hoping against hope to spot any trace of the missing man. Despite all these exhaustive efforts, the search turned up absolutely nothing. Not a single footprint. Now, terrifyingly, episode man. How could an experienced hiker disappear so completely? The leading theory based is that Kirshner suffered a catastrophic accident out in the wilderness. Given the well-documented dangers in that specific area, many professionals believe he likely fell into a hidden sinkhole. Or perhaps he slipped over a cliff near the jagged canyon rim. A fall from such extreme heights, or plunging into a deep pit, would be undeniably catastrophic. It might neatly explain why searchers never found his remains. If Kirshner's body ended up trapped at the bottom of an unseen chasm, it could easily remain undiscovered despite all the massive search efforts. The area itself is so remote, it is seldom visited by anyone, so it is highly possible no one has yet happened across any sign of him. Another distinct possibility is that Kirshner became lost or severely injured, and eventually succumbed to the harsh elements. April nights out in this high desert are deceptively, brutally cold. The days can be blistering hot. That is a truly dangerous combination if you happen to be stranded without shelter or adequate water. Kirshner only had a small day pack with him. He was definitely not equipped for a prolonged ordeal out in the wild. If he somehow wandered far beyond the initial designated search zone, or got hopelessly trapped in none of the tight side canyons, he might simply have been missed. Still, the complete and total lack of clues, such as an improvised campsite or discarded gear, makes this scenario feel significantly less convincing. Foul play is generally considered an unlikely scenario, though it cannot be entirely ruled out. The location is just extremely isolated. Encountering a wrongdoer way out there would be exceedingly rare. Investigator found zero evidence pointing to robbery or violence of any kind. His vehicle and his personal belongings were completely undisturbed. All signs point much more toward a tragic mishap rather than a violent crime in this case. Although official investigators view Reinhard Kirshner's fate as a tragic hiking accident, some segments of the public have heavily speculated about whether his sudden disappearance is secretly related to his profession. Kirshner was a physicist working in Germany. That is a highly specialized field that often involves sensitive research projects. While there is absolutely no hard evidence suggesting that he was working on classified or high-security military projects, the pure mystery of his vanishing has naturally encouraged such wild theories. Some suggest he could have been permanently silenced because of specific knowledge he possessed. Others have proposed that he may have actually chosen to disappear deliberately, faking his death to escape immense professional pressures. It is really important right here to emphasize that these ideas remain highly speculative. There is no tangible proof connecting his physics career to his disappearance out in Arizona. Still, the unique combination of his scientific expertise and the total baffling lack of physical evidence has allowed these persistent theories to dominate discussions of his cold case. While Reinhard Kirshner's disappearance is clearly both tragic and deeply sad, I don't see it as a particularly dark tale, like some have aggressively suggested. The most consistent and credible explanation for his disappearance perfectly aligns with the official narrative. A tragic, sudden accident in an unforgiving landscape. Search teams specifically noted the heavy prevalence of those hidden sinkholes and sheer cliffs located right near Hellhole Bend. Any one of them could have claimed his life in an instant. With no signs of foul play and zero evidence suggesting an intentional disappearance, the simplest answer is usually also the most logical one. Kirshner was a seasoned outdoorsman. Some people have used that exact fact to argue that the case could be much darker. But even the best experts can be violently overwhelmed by the sudden hazards of remote terrain. His case essentially illustrates how nature's brutal unpredictability can easily overcome preparation and vast experience, especially in truly unforgiving terrain.
Story time.
The Athabasca Tower Mystery. Let's shift focus to a completely different kind of wilderness. August 26, 2006. Deep in the remote forests of Alberta, Canada, a deeply unsettling scene waited inside an isolated fire lookout cabin. A pot of water sat boiling away on the stove. The occupant was entirely missing. Outside the front door, investigators spotted a smear of fresh blood on the wooden steps, a silent, violent indicator that something went horribly wrong. This cabin belonged to Stephanie Stewart. She was a 70-year-old veteran wildfire spotter stationed at the Athabasca Lookout Tower near Hinton. She lived there entirely alone. That morning, Stephanie vanished. She left behind a trail of confusing clues and a haunting mystery that remains unsolved nearly 2 decades later. Now, Stephanie was definitely not your average 70-year-old. I mean, she was more athletic than most adults in their 20s or 30s. She had previously bicycled across the entire expanse of Canada by herself. She climbed Mount Kilimanjaro in her late 60s, a devoted mother, an avid reader. She divided her life between wintering in the town of Canmore and spending her summers isolated in the deep woods. For 18 years, she worked for the Alberta Forestry Service. For the final 13 of those seasons, she occupied this exact same post, the Athabasca Tower in William Switzer Provincial Park. Her cabin sat at the base of a 40-foot observation tower on a high ridge. Every single day, she climbed that steep ladder to scan the sprawling boreal forest for smoke plumes. It was profoundly lonely work. She was the only human being for miles in any direction. She absolutely loved it. The evening of August 25, 2006 felt entirely normal. Stephanie chatted with family members on the phone at around 9 o'clock. But the very next morning, red flags started flying. She missed her mandatory radio check-in at 8:30. This was a strict daily safety protocol she never ignored. Her supervisor became highly concerned. He tried call the cabin's landline multiple times. This is where things get genuinely creepy. Someone actually picked up the phone. But every time the receiver was lifted, the person on the other end instantly hung up the line without uttering a single syllable. After a few tries, the line went totally dead, like the cord had been ripped right out of the wall. Panic set in. The supervisor immediately drove out to the Athabasca site, pulling up just before 9 in the morning. He stepped into a deeply ominous reality. Stephanie's pickup truck sat parked right in its usual spot. She hadn't driven away. Inside, the cabin felt frozen in time. That pot of water was boiling aggressively on the stove, like she had just stepped outside for a split second. A quick visual sweep of the perimeter revealed absolutely no sign of her. Recognizing several disturbing details, the supervisor backed away and dialed the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Stephanie was officially declared a missing person. When forensic teams processed the small living quarters, they cataloged several missing items. Her gold wristwatch was gone. More importantly, specific bedding items were missing. 2 pillows with blue cases, a burgundy bedsheet, a Navajo pattern duvet, all gone. Yet the interior showed zero signs of a physical struggle. The exterior told a different story. That blood on the steps was relatively fresh. Authorities kept the exact DNA details tightly under wraps, but its presence undeniably pointed to foul play. The evidence practically screamed one conclusion. Someone abducted Stephanie Stewart that morning. Word spread rapidly. Authorities launched an unprecedented search and rescue operation across the rugged foothills. Park rangers, police units, hundreds of civilian volunteers. They combed the dense timber. Helicopters ran grid patterns overhead while tracking dogs scoured the underbrush. They swept a massive radius around the tower. They found absolutely nothing. Evolved into one of the largest manhunts in Alberta's history, yielding painfully zero results. Investigators correctly treated the cabin as a major crime scene from day one. Voluntary disappearance was entirely ruled out. She left her keys, her vehicle, and her morning coffee on the heat. She fully intended to work her shift. The missing blankets strongly suggested a perpetrator used them to wrap and transport her body out of the cabin. Despite the intense forensic sweep, police never released any information regarding suspect fingerprints or DNA. They did publicly confer my tragic fact. The physical evidence convinced them Stephanie was the victim of a homicide. With 0 arrests, theories naturally flourished. The most grounded hypothesis suggests a random encounter gone wrong. An unknown individual likely drove up the remote access road early that morning. Maybe a drifter looking to rob the place. The boiling water implies Stephanie might have offered this stranger a cup of tea or coffee. She was known to be highly hospitable to passing hikers. In this scenario, the visitor suddenly turned violent. The killer then rushed to clean up and hide the body. The bizarre phone activity perfectly aligns with this. The intruder was likely standing right inside the cabin at 8:30 when the supervisor called, panicking and ripping the cord out of the wall to stop the ringing. Another theory suggests she knew her attacker. It easily explains why she unlocked her door in such an isolated environment. If a disgruntled park employee or an acquaintance showed up, she wouldn't hesitate to let them inside. However, police thoroughly investigated her professional circles. As far as the public knows, no one within the Park Service was ever named a suspect. Over the years, armchair detectives frequently point to a man named Travis Vader. Vader is a notorious figure in Alberta's criminal history. In 2010, he murdered an elderly couple during a botched robbery, burning their recreational vehicle and hiding their remains in the deep wilderness. He clearly preyed on vulnerable senior citizens and operated in rural areas. Some reports placed him near the town of Hinton, around the time Stephanie vanished. Could he have driven up that ridge in 2006? It's a terrifying thought. But it is vital to clarify that police have never officially charged or linked Vader to the Stewart case. It remains pure speculation. Still, it perfectly illustrates the exact type of predator capable of this crime. Initially, some wondered about a wild animal attack. A massive bear, perhaps? Investigators quickly shut that down. There were 0 animal tracks. Furthermore, bears do not methodically steal Navajo duvets, nor do they unplug landline telephones to avoid detection. They simply don't care about forensic countermeasures, or whether a jury will convict them for a crime. In the wake of this tragedy, Alberta's Forestry Department overhauled security for isolated workers. Fire lookouts are no longer open, welcoming outposts. They are surrounded by heavy locked gates and perimeter fencing to keep intruders out. Highway signs directing tourists to these towers were permanently removed. Spotters are now strictly ordered to keep their doors locked and treat all unannounced visitors as potential threats. The cabins themselves received heavy upgrades: shatterproof glass, reinforced steel doors, industrial locks. Brush was aggressively cleared back to provide a clear line of sight, eliminating any spots where an attacker could hide and ambush. Despite the massive search, the security overhauls, and nearly 20 years of investigation, no trace of Stephanie Stewart has ever been recovered. Her case remains a chilling national park mystery.
Story time.
The vanishing of Dennis Martin. You know, it takes less than 5 minutes for an entire family's world to violently shatter. To put this into proper perspective, this is significantly less time than it takes to boil a simple kettle of water on the stove. It is less time than it takes to give Freebird a listen. In that incredibly brief window, a picture-perfect June afternoon can curdle right into a waking nightmare. A beloved child can step behind a single bush and chest drop completely off the face of the earth. For the Martin family, that horrifying window opened and closed on June 14th, 1969. It happened in the vast, beautiful, and wildly unforgiving wilderness of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. What immediately followed was not just a frantic, terrifying search for a missing boy. It became a sprawling story of utter chaos, deep heartbreak, and an unexpected legacy that would eventually change the exact science of saving lives forever. This is the tragic story of Dennis Martin, the vanished boy who would ultimately capture the entire nation's attention. For the Martin family, who hailed from Knoxville, Tennessee, the annual Father's Day weekend camping trip was a deeply cherished tradition. In June of 1969, William Martin led the familiar, happy expedition. He brought his 2 young sons along. There was 9-year-old Douglas and 6-year-old Dennis. He also brought his own father, Clyde. For Dennis, who was just 6 days shy of his 7th birthday, this was his very first time coming along on this big trip. The first day went exactly as planned. The family hiked from Cades Cove over to Russell Field. They camped out for the night before continuing their journey the next morning on Saturday, June 14th. Their ultimate destination was Spence Field. This is a beautiful, sweeping highland meadow nestled right along the famous Appalachian Trail, well known for its stunning panoramic views. There, they happily met up with another family. The afternoon unfolded in the idyllic, relaxing way of such outings. The adults were relaxing in the grass, the children were actively playing nearby. Sometime right after lunch, the young boys hatched a playful plan. In a sudden fit of youthful excitement, they decided to play a prank on the resting adults. They were going to split Ave, hide in the dense, thick foliage that closely bordered the meadow, and then jump out to surprise everyone. William Martin watched with a sense of amusement as the children excitedly whispered and plotted together. Because Dennis was wearing a very bright red t-shirt, the older boys naturally worried he would be far too easy to spot. So they sent him off in a totally different direction to hide all by himself. It was a seemingly innocent, normal decision. In any other moment in time, it would have been a minor, entirely forgotten detail in a simple children's game. But that bright red shirt, which logically should have been a brilliant beacon of visibility, would instead become a dark icon of an impenetrable mystery. At approximately 4:30 that afternoon, the mousetrap was effectively sprung. The older boys leaped excitedly from hiding places with loud shouts and laughter. But Dennis did not appear. His father, William, had literally just seen him go behind a bush just moments before. At first, there was absolutely no alarm. But as the long seconds ticked by, a cold knot of unease began to form in his stomach. Time began to move agonizingly slowly. William would later estimate that about 5 minutes passed before his initial concern curdled into full-blown sheer panic. He began desperately calling his son's name, his voice cut sharply through the thin mountain air. There was no answer. William immediately began a frantic, desperate search, running blindly down the winding trail for nearly 2 miles. He was fully convinced his small son could not have possibly gone any farther than that. The other adults quickly joined in, scouring the nearby woods. Absolutely nothing was found. As dusk began to ominously settle over the ancient mountains, the family's waking nightmare was severely compounded by a new, formidable adversary: the weather. A severe, violent thunderstorm rolled in with terrifying speed. It unleashed a biblical deluge of rain, which rapidly caused small streams to develop into raging, dangerous torrents. Temperatures plummeted to unseasonable lows, dropping to only about a dozen degrees off freezing. The storm was significantly more than just bad luck. It was a catastrophic environmental event that essentially acted as an active accomplice to the boys' disappearance. It systematically erased the very few fragile clues that might have existed in the dirt. It washed away delicate footprints. It obliterated any lingering scent for the tracking dogs. It ensured the scene was wiped completely clean. The official, organized search for Dennis Martin officially began at 5 the next morning, Sunday, June 15th. What started out with a modest crew of 30 National Park Service personnel rapidly escalated into the largest search and rescue operation in the entire history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The sheer numbers were staggering. Within a single day, the force swelled to 240 people. By Dennis's 7th birthday on June 20th, nearly 800 people were actively combing the steep mountainside. The effort finally peaked on June 21st. An astonishing 1,400 searchers were directly involved in the hunt. The desperate call for help had been rapidly answered by a highly diverse, deeply dedicated coalition. There were seasoned park rangers, local rescue squads pulled from several neighboring states, dedicated scout troops, college students, brave firefighters, and even 40 elite Green Berets sent directly from Fort Bragg. The tragic story completely captivated the nation. Even President Richard Nixon was reportedly monitoring the dire situation closely from his desk in the White House. Notably, this massive, unprecedented search effort actually had far more in common with a disorganized, chaotic posse than with what we presently think of when we think of modern search and rescue protocols. At the time, the National Park Service had absolutely no detailed pre-existing search and rescue doctrines in place. The prevailing philosophy of the era was grimly called surround and drown. Basically, you just take as big a wave of warm bodies and sniffer dogs as humanly possible, and literally deluge the specific area. This surround and drown approach proved to be a profoundly catastrophic mistake. The massive, totally uncoordinated wave of well-intentioned but largely inexperienced volunteers descended aggressively on the delicate area. They inadvertently destroyed the very evidence they were desperately there to find. Potential footprints were carelessly trampled into the mud. Delicate scents that may have still lingered were deeply contaminated. Fragile clues like broken twigs were utterly obliterated by heavy boots. The paradox is deeply disturbing. The immense public desire to help did more to hurt the actual efforts than anything else. The sprawling search was officially scaled back on June 26th. It was largely abandoned altogether by June 29th. Finally, it was formally closed on September 14, 1969. The immense deluge of men and women had officially receded. They left the dark mountain just as silent as it was the exact moment little Dennis disappeared. In the terrifying vacuum left by the failed search, wild theories began to aggressively grow. With no body recovered, no shredded clothing found, and absolutely no concrete physical evidence, the sudden disappearance of Dennis Martin became a blank canvas, a case on which people eagerly projected their wildest, deepest fears. The most straightforward, officially accepted theory is that Dennis simply wandered off, became profoundly disoriented, and tragically perished from harsh exposure or a sudden accident. The area is well known for its incessant howling winds that can easily drown out the faint cries of a small, lost child. While there is no direct, tangible evidence to actively support this claim, this remains the official stance held by the authorities. The Great Smoky Mountains are home to a wide variety of wildlife. This includes massive black bears and aggressive feral pigs. This naturally led to rampant speculation that Dennis was violently attacked and carried off into the brush. Some reports from that specific time noted that a severe drought the previous year had made the local animals significantly bolder and hungrier than usual. However, wildlife experts and many veteran investigators remained highly skeptical of this bloody theory. A purely predatory attack on a human by a black bear is exceedingly rare. Furthermore, an event violent enough to physically carry away a struggling child would almost certainly have left behind some gruesome evidence: blood, torn fabric, scad. Still, this theory hasn't been entirely dismissed by everyone. It is theoretically possible. From the very beginning of the ordeal, Dennis's father, William Martin, believed in his heart that his young son was kidnapped. This dark theory hinges entirely on a single, deeply problematic piece of civilian testimony. On the very afternoon Dennis vanished, a tourist named Harold Key and his family were hiking in the park. They were miles away from Spencefield. They reported hearing a sudden, loud scream. Shortly thereafter, they claimed they witnessed a rough-looking man rapidly advancing through the dense woods. For professional investigators, it was a highly unreliable lead. The alleged sighting occurred around 5 trail miles from the actual disappearance site. That is a deeply significant distance for someone to forcibly carry a kicking child in such a short amount of time, especially through incredibly rough, unbroken terrain. Further compounding the issue, there are absolutely no direct trails connecting those two locations, meaning that this mysterious man would have had to have dragged Dennis directly through the thick, uncharted woods. The absolute lack of a clean resolution in the Dennis Martin case created a perfect, fertile environment for bizarre regional legends to attach themselves to the tragic story. Generally speaking, I don't typically mention these sort of fringe theories for cases such as this. But here, there appears to be a highly significant amount of people who passionately advocate for this exact theory. For generations, local mountain folklore has heavily included chilling tales of feral people living deep in the untamed wilderness. Inevitably, the sad story of the lost boy became tightly intertwined with these campfire legends. Some wildly speculate he was silently taken by such a primitive group. Notably, Harold Key's description of an unkempt, shaggy man is frequently cited as hard evidence by people who rigidly believe this feral theory. More than 50 years later, the ultimate fate of Dennis Martin remains one of the Great Smoky Mountains' most profound, enduring mysteries. The ancient forest has strictly kept its dark secret. It is virtually impossible that we will ever know for certain what truly happened in those brief, terrifying minutes at Spencefield. For now, Dennis Martin's heartbreaking case remains yet another haunting, unsolved national park enigma.
Story time.
The vanishing on Denali, a frigid February night, 1984. High up on Alaska's Mount Denali, the peak historically referred to as Mount McKinley, one of the 20th century's most prolific adventurers completely vanished up there, without a single trace. Naomi Uemura had literally just achieved a staggering physical milestone. Basically, he completed the first solo winter ascent of Denali. Right? But he would never make it down to share his story. The very next day following his historic summit, things turned lethal. Temperatures plummeted to minus 50 degrees. Howling winds battered the upper ridges. Uemura simply disappeared into that vast icy expanse. Decades later, his fate remains a total mystery. It leaves people fascinated by his sheer endurance and heartbroken by the stark reality of mountain climbing. To truly understand this, you need to know Uemura was not your average weekend climber. This man possessed a resume of solo exploits that cemented his status as a living legend. He reached the North Pole alone, the first to ever do so. Rafting the Amazon River solo, he was the first to do that as well. Back in 1970, he became the very first individual to summit Denali by himself during the summer. Actually, by the time he turned 29, he had already conquered 5 of the world's 7 summits, a record highlighting incredible stamina. He was soft-spoken, unassuming, yet he carried an iron will inside him, tackling challenges the world deemed completely impossible. So by 1984, he set his sights on a fresh target, a solo winter ascent of Denali. At slightly over 20,000 feet in elevation, Denali stands as North America's highest peak. It is utterly infamous for brutal weather. Summer climbs are hard enough. Winter attempts are frankly suicidal. In fact, nobody had even summited in the winter season until 1967. And just to give you some crucial context, no human being had ever dared attempt a solo winter climb there before Uemura arrived. Meticulous preparation was absolutely critical. Uemura understood the persistent threat of hidden glacier crevices beneath the snowpack. To prevent a fatal plunge into one of these dark pits, he rigged a self-rescue system. It sounds completely insane today. He strapped long bamboo poles horizontally across his shoulders. If he broke through the ice, these poles would catch the edges of the crevasse, suspending him so he could crawl out. He embraced a fast and light philosophy. He hauled a sled and a backpack weighing only about 40 pounds total. To shave precious ounces, he completely ditched a tent. He planned to dig snow caves for shelter instead. Fuel was strictly rationed. He accepted that he would eat his meals ice cold. Every ounce left behind meant greater speed, which was fundamentally required that you are racing against short daylight hours and sudden winter storms. February 1st, 1984, Uemura departed the Kahiltna Glacier base camp, entirely alone. For the next 10 days, local bush pilots would occasionally fly past to monitor his upward progress from a safe distance. They watched him methodically ascend the west buttress route, powerless to intervene if disaster struck. The conditions were monstrous. He waded through waist-deep snow. He scaled vertical blue ice. Exposed skin could freeze solid in a matter of seconds. Despite violent storms hammering the upper altitudes, Uemura steadily pushed higher. He cached supplies along the trail to shed weight. Surpassing the 14,000-foot mark, he entered the thin air of the upper mountain. Then came February 12th, 1984, offered a brief window of clear skies. It also happened to be his 43rd birthday. A passing pilot spotted him just a few hundred feet below the summit that afternoon. Uemura radioed in, estimating he would reach the peak by 4 o'clock. Altitude drastically slows the human body, though. When the flight crew circled back at 4, he was still climbing. Night quickly swallowed the mountain. Visual contact was permanently lost. Incredibly, Uemura reached the top that evening. He planted the Japanese flag at the summit of Denali, standing entirely alone in the freezing dark. The following morning, he made a brief radio transmission confirming his success. He explained he had descended for a few hours to establish a temporary camp. He sounded deeply exhausted, but he stated he was okay, instructing his team to expect him back at base camp by February 15th. Sadly, those were his final recorded words. The weather violently collapsed shortly after that morning call. A ferocious storm enveloped Denali on February 13th. Blinding whiteout conditions, bitter cold. Flight crews tried to spot him on the 13th and 14th, seeing nothing but churning clouds. By February 15th, day he was scheduled to finish, anxiety reached a boiling point. Doug Geeting, a veteran pilot, flew straight to base camp. The site was completely empty. Geeting aggressively searched the route from the air. Nothing. He logically assumed Uemura was hunkered down in a snow cave up high, simply waiting out the terrible winds. February 16th brought a glimmer of hope. Geeting flew up again with another pilot. They caught a fleeting glimpse of someone popping out of a snow cave and casually waving. They firmly believed it was Uemura. Prior to the expedition, Uemura agreed to signal frantically if he required immediate rescue. A calm wave implied he was managing the situation. Authorities chose to delay a highly dangerous helicopter extraction. The winds were vicious. Plus, they hesitated to insult Uemura's extreme self-reliance. Plucking him off the mountain would place an asterisk next to his historic winter solo record. They waited. The brutal weather refused to break until February 19th. A pilot eventually spotted Uemura's abandoned snowshoes resting at roughly 14,000 feet. He had left them there during his ascent. This discovery fueled optimism that he was still alive above that altitude. Finally, on February 20th, the skies cleared. The team took drastic action. Search planes scrutinized the mountain in bright morning light. They scanned the entire West Buttress route repeatedly. No movement, no tracks. In such pristine visibility, a moving climber would be obvious. His total absence was terrifying. The National Park Service initiated a ground operation. The helicopter dropped 2 expert mountaineers at the 14,000-foot level. They climbed up to 16,000 feet, discovering one of Uemura's old snow caves. They even saw the Japanese flag fluttering near the summit, but they found no trace of the man himself. Another massive storm rolled in soon after. It halted all rescue efforts. Days dragged on. On February 26th, authorities officially canceled the search. Naomi Uemura was declared missing and presumed dead. Experts have heavily debated what exactly went wrong. One prominent theory suggests a fatal fall during descent. There is a specific stretch on the West Buttress that is essentially a sheer wall of ice. It is brutally unforgiving in winter. A single slipped crampon or an unexpected wind gust could send a climber plummeting into a void. Drifting snow would instantly bury a body. That would explain why searchers never found him. Another grim scenario points to high-altitude exposure. He reached the summit dangerously late in the day. He was already running on empty. He might have been overwhelmed by hypothermia near Denali Pass. If he failed to dig a snow cave fast enough in the whiteout, the cold would shut his organs down. Interestingly, searchers later discovered some of his gear abandoned around 17,000 feet. This implies he intentionally dumped weight for his final push. In the blinding descent, he likely missed this vital cache of warmer equipment. Lacking proper shelter in a weakened state, even a minor stumble would be a death sentence. And well, some professionals strongly doubt the February 16th sighting was even real, attributing it to an optical illusion caused by shadows and snow. Whether the mountain took him via a fall or sheer cold, Naomi Uemura perished on Denali. Japan mourned deeply. He posthumously received the prestigious People's Honor Award. More than 4 decades later, the mountain still refuses to yield his remains. Right now, there are stretches of highway in Alabama where your phone will hit 0 bars, your GPS will glitch, and you will be completely on your own. Millions of people drive these routes every year, but a select few take a wrong turn and completely vanish from existence. We are talking about missing people, unexplained anomalies, and Alabama towns that literally do not want you there. Look, not one of these individuals made it home the way they were supposed to. Alabama has over 67,000 miles of roads. Most of them, well, they go somewhere. But some of them, based on what we are about to cover, they do not bring you back.
Story time.
August in Alabama is not a gentle month. The heat by mid-morning is the kind that sits on you thick and wet, and it does not lift. The air smells like pine sap, red clay, and cut grass baking in the sun. The sky is white blue and enormous. In the trailer parks and residential neighborhoods of Watauga County, the kids are still on summer break, moving through the days with the loose, unhurried rhythm of children who have nowhere they have to be. School is still weeks away. The days are long and full of nothing in particular. The mornings are slow and quiet in the way that only summer mornings in the deep South manage to be. It is the kind of quiet that feels safe, like nothing bad could happen inside it, like the world has agreed to just let the day be ordinary. In Prattville in August 2001, the air conditioners hummed in trailer windows. Kids moved between yards, and parents left for early shifts while their children were still asleep. It was, by every surface measure, a summer morning like any other. That feeling is exactly what makes August 16, 2001 so hard to sit with. Shannon Pohl was 11 years old. She lived with her mother, Marie Pohl, in the Candlestick Park trailer park in Prattville, a working city of roughly 25,000 people situated just northwest of Montgomery, the state capital in Watauga County. Prattville is the kind of place that does not tend to make national news. It has churches, dollar stores, and neighborhoods where people recognize each other's cars, wave across chain-link fences, and look out for the children playing in the street. Candlestick Park was that kind of community, tight-knit, familiar, the kind of neighborhood where an 11-year-old moving around outside on a summer day was not alarming, not unusual, and not something that required a second thought. Children walked to friends' houses, they sat on steps, rode bikes in the street, and existed in the visible everyday world of their neighborhood without anyone worrying. In a place like Candlestick Park, that was just what summer looked like. Marie Pohl worked early shifts. On the morning of August 16th, she left for work at 4 o'clock in the morning while Shannon was still asleep on the couch. Before she walked out the door into the pre-dawn dark, Marie kissed her daughter on the forehead. Shannon's older sister was in the house. Everything was in its place, and Marie drove to work the way she did every morning. There was no reason to pause, no feeling that anything was wrong, no instinct pulling her back toward the door. She had no way of knowing that the moment she was moving through was the last time she would ever see her daughter alive. That is the part that does not leave you when you read about this case. It is not the investigation, nor the evidence, nor the years of unanswered questions. It is that image, a mother walking out in the dark, kissing her sleeping child, and how completely ordinary it was, and how completely it ended right there. Marie clocked out at approximately 2:30 that afternoon. She stopped to pick up her grandson from the babysitter on the way home, decided to grab something small from the store for Shannon. Little something, a gesture toward a good afternoon. When she arrived home, Shannon was not there. Her sister had not seen her leave. No one could account for where she had gone or when. The checking, the calling, and the walking around the neighborhood produced only one piece of information that would define the next 2 decades of investigation. At some point that day, a witness in the Candlestick Park community had seen Shannon outside, standing near a vehicle, speaking with an unidentified man. The man was driving a tan or gold 4-door sedan. He was not a recognizable face in the neighborhood. The witness noted him because he did not belong there, an unfamiliar car on a street where unfamiliar cars were noticed. Shannon was near the passenger side of the vehicle, and she and the man were talking. The witness observed them. The conversation appeared to still be happening. And then the witness moved on, the way you do when nothing about what you are seeing registers as wrong. A child talking near a car in broad daylight in her own neighborhood is not, on its surface, alarming. You do not stop. You do not intervene. You keep walking, and later, when you are asked what you saw, you understand what that moment meant in a way you could not have understood it while it was happening. That is the last confirmed sighting of Shannon Pohl alive. A child, a car, an unknown man, a summer afternoon in a neighborhood where she was supposed to be safe. And that is the last confirmed time anyone saw her. The response was immediate and large. The case generated regional media attention quickly. An 11-year-old missing from a residential community. A witness account placing her near an unidentified vehicle and an unknown man. The specific and particular dread of a child who had been present and then was not. A community task force was assembled. Law enforcement expanded the search across the surrounding area. Residents were interviewed at length. The description of the tan or gold four-door sedan was distributed across the region. Who was behind the wheel? What were the plates? Where had the car come from and where had it gone after leaving Candlestick Park? Had anyone else on the street seen it? Had anyone at an intersection between that neighborhood and the highway caught a glimpse of it leaving? Those questions have never been answered publicly. Note in 2001. Not in 2010. Not today. 23 years after Shannon Polk was taken from her front yard in broad daylight by someone no one has ever been able to name. Approximately 1 month after she disappeared, Shannon's remains were discovered in a wooded area near Prattville. Her death was ruled a homicide. DNA evidence was collected from the scene, physical, biological evidence that contains the genetic identity of the person who killed her. That DNA has been tested and run against available databases. It has never matched anyone. No arrest has ever been made. No person of interest has ever been formally and publicly named by law enforcement. The man in the tan or gold sedan has never been identified. He has never been charged. He has never been found. For more than 2 decades, the name of the person who took Shannon Paul from her front yard has remained unknown, filed under a case number in a county office, attached to a sample of DNA that has never found its match. Here is the critical detail about where this investigation stands today. Prattville Police Department Sergeant Tom Allen, who has worked Shannon's case for years, confirmed as recently as 2023 that tips still come in on a regular basis. 2 or 3 a week, many of them driven by true crime media coverage, including the CBS 42 Missing Mysteries series that revisited the case in late 2023. He noted that a specific tip had come in from North Alabama that investigators were actively pursuing at that time. The advances in forensic DNA genealogy, the investigative method that traces a suspect backward through their biological family tree using material preserved from a crime scene, have not yet produced a result in Shannon's case. But the technology that now exists is genuinely different from anything available in 2003. For a case where the biological evidence has been carefully maintained, that gap in capability represents a real and active avenue that investigators have not closed the door on. Now this is where the case turns dark in a broader and more unsettling way. Shannon Paul did not disappear in isolation, and the geography of what surrounds her case is something that every investigator who has looked at it closely has had to grapple with. 2 years before Shannon disappeared, in 1999, an 11-year-old girl named Teresa Dean vanished in Georgia under similar circumstances. 2 years after Shannon disappeared, in August 2003, an 11-year-old girl named Heaven Lachey Ross vanished from a trailer park in Northport, Alabama, less than 90 miles to the north. That same year, Tabitha Tudors disappeared from Nashville, Tennessee. All 4 girls were approximately the same age. All 4 disappeared from residential neighborhoods or trailer park communities, walking alone. In 3 of the 4 cases, including Shannon's, there was active commercial construction happening near the route the child had been walking. All 4 cases fall within a geographic corridor running through the Deep South and Lower Appalachian region, and all 4 remain officially unsolved, with no one ever charged in connection with any of them. Investigators across multiple jurisdictions examined whether a connection could be established between these disappearances. The possibility of a single offender or a connected network moving through that corridor received serious attention. It was never confirmed. The official position is that these cases are separate and unrelated, but laid flat on a map, with the dates, the ages, and the settings side by side. The pattern these 4 cases form does not disappear when you stop looking at it. Investigators who have spoken about the potential link have not closed the door on it. They have simply not been able to open it far enough to walk through. There is one more thing worth sitting with before we move on, and it concerns the community itself. Candlestick Park was not a place where strangers passed through unnoticed. It was a residential enclosure, a defined, bounded space with a limited number of entry points where the population was stable and familiar to itself. When a tan or gold four-door sedan pulled in that afternoon, at least one person noticed it, and noticed Shannon near it. That means the car was visible. That means there may have been others who saw it and did not come forward for whatever reason. Fear, uncertainty, and the sense that what they had seen was too small to matter. If anyone who was in or near Candlestick Park on August 16, 2001 still carries the image of that car, Prattville police and Crime Stoppers are still accepting information. Shannon's mother kissed her forehead at 4 a.m, drove to work, came home with something small from the store, and walked into a house where her daughter was not. The answer to what happened in the hours between those two moments has not been given to her family. In 23 years, Marie Paul has spoken publicly about Shannon every time the coverage returns. She is still hoping. She is still asking who, what, when, where, why, and the answer is still the same. That is the detail that stays with you.
Story time.
Christmas in a small Alabama town has a specific texture. The roads go quiet in the afternoon. The dollar stores close early. The churches fill up for evening services and then empty back out into neighborhoods where the lights are on, the curtains are drawn, and families are inside doing what families do on Christmas: eating, watching television, or sitting around tables with people they love or people they tolerate. It is a complicated mixture sometimes. It is the one day of the year when the expectation of presence is absolute. You are supposed to be somewhere on Christmas. You are supposed to be accounted for, right? Your absence is felt immediately by everyone in the specific context of a day when no one is supposed to be alone, and no one is supposed to be unreachable. A person who goes missing on Christmas Day is not someone who slipped through a gap in the calendar. They are someone whose absence lands like a heavy door closing in an empty house. Immediate, wrong, and impossible to explain away. Julie Danielle Ray, known to everyone who knew her as Danny, was 37 years old in December 2015. She lived in Calera, a small city in Shelby County, Alabama, positioned along Interstate 65 about 25 miles south of Birmingham. Calera is a place that has grown steadily with the suburban expansion of the Birmingham metro area. Newer subdivisions, chain restaurants along the highway corridor, the kind of incremental growth that happens when a city's orbit widens and pulls smaller towns into its edge. It is not remote. It is not isolated. It sits right on a major interstate connected to a major city inside a county with functioning municipal infrastructure and active law enforcement. It is, in other words, exactly the kind of place where a 37-year-old woman should not be able to vanish without a trace on Christmas Day. And yet she stayed vanished for 10 years without anyone in a position of authority treating it as the emergency it was. Danny was a mother. She had 2 teenage sons, 14 and 15 years old at the time of her disappearance. She worked as a restaurant server and was, by every account from the people who knew her, someone who stayed connected to her family as a matter of character. Her stepfather, Richard Bradshaw, would later say that it was simply not like her. Regardless of her circumstances, regardless of whatever might have been difficult in her life at any given time, to go silent without telling someone in her family where she was or when she would be back. She checked in. She made contact. The silence, and it came, was immediately recognizable as wrong. The as-confirmed physical sighting of Danny Ray was on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2015, at a residence on 10th Street in Calera. One of her sons was present at that location and saw her. Her father, Richard Bradshaw, spoke to her by phone on Christmas Eve. That conversation was the last confirmed contact anyone in her family had with her. The phone went completely quiet after that call. Christmas Day arrived. Danny did not appear. She did not call. She did not check in with her sons or her father or anyone else in her family. And when the calling started, reaching out, the asking around, the attempt to trace the last 24 hours, the trail ended fast. Here is the critical detail, and it is the one that defines the entire shape of this case and what it means. There has been no confirmed financial activity connected to Julie Danielle Ray since December 25, 2015. No bank withdrawals, no credit card use, no phone activity, no social media presence, and no sightings that have been publicly verified by investigators. For 10 years, from Christmas 2015 through the present, Danny Ray has not surfaced in any of the systems that modern life inevitably leaves marks in. That is not the signature of a woman who walked away voluntarily and started over somewhere new. People who leave voluntarily use money, they make calls, they surface in databases, at border crossings, in rental agreements, or in emergency rooms at the edges of someone else's life. A decade of complete and total absence across every system simultaneously is not a lifestyle choice. It is what happens when someone is no longer alive to leave a trace. The investigation that followed her disappearance was, by the admission of the agency responsible for it, inadequate. In December 2025, nearly 10 years to the day after Danny disappeared, Calera Police Chief David Heiche held a press conference and said publicly what the family had believed for the entire decade. This case had not been given its due. Those were his exact words. Not that the evidence was insufficient or that the leads had all been followed and exhausted. No, the case had simply not received the investigative attention it deserved. That statement, delivered by the chief of the department that held the case for 10 years without resolution, is itself a form of answer to 10 years of questions. It does not bring Danny back, it does not name a suspect, but it confirms what the family already knew, that part of what happened to this case was not mysterious. It was a failure of institutional priority, and the institution has since said so in public, at a podium, with the family present. The renewed investigation that launched in late 2025 brought substantial new resources to bear. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Birmingham field office joined the Calera Police Department as a formal partner. Out-of-state interviews were conducted by Bureau agents on behalf of the local department. Criminal profilers were deployed to assist with case analysis. Detective Jacob Reach, whose arrival at the Calera Detective Bureau had already helped move other dormant cases forward, brought fresh attention to the file. Crime Stoppers of Metro Alabama posted a $5,000 cash reward for information. The Federal Bureau of Investigation placed Julie Danielle Ray on its official wanted and missing persons page. Ken Atkinson of Crime Stoppers confirmed publicly that the tip line is fully anonymous. Calls route through an out-of-state answering service. The caller's number does not appear, and information can be passed without any identifying connection to the source. But here is what does not make sense about the investigative history of this case. Detail that the chief's December 2025 statement makes impossible to set aside. There was a key witness in this case, the last known person to have been with Danny before she disappeared. That individual died before the investigation was comprehensively conducted. Whatever that person knew, whatever they had seen, whatever had happened on or around Christmas 2015, or whatever they might have told investigators under serious and sustained questioning, well, it died with them. The opportunity to put that witness in a formal interview, to press them, to test their account, closed while the case sat dormant and while the clock ran. That is not an unfortunate circumstance. That is a direct consequence of a case not being treated with urgency when urgency was exactly what it required. There is one more dimension to this case that tends to get compressed in the coverage, and it deserves more space. Danny Ray was a working mother in a small Alabama city. She was not a public figure. She was not wealthy. She did not have the kind of platform or social capital that generates sustained media pressure on a police department to treat a disappearance as a priority. What she had was a family who loved her, a community that knew her, and a department that, by its own admission a decade later, did not treat her case with the urgency it required. The pattern that produced that outcome is not unique to Calera or to 2015. It is a pattern that appears in case after case across the country in which a woman disappears, and the response from official institutions is slower, quieter, and less resourced than it would have been under different circumstances. The fact that the Calera police chief said so publicly in 2025 is notable. It is not common for departments to say these things out loud. It does not fix the lost decade, but it is a form of acknowledgement that matters to a family that has been asking for 10 years why nobody came sooner. Richard Bradshaw has spoken publicly about his daughter every time coverage has returned to the case. He said in December 2025 that the last decade had been filled with pain that is difficult to describe. He appealed directly to Danny during the press conference. He said, "If you can hear this, please give us a call and we will come get you. We love you very much." A father at a podium 10 years later, still leaving the door open, still saying the words. Because saying anything else out loud in front of cameras means accepting the answer that a decade of total silence most strongly suggests. And no father should have to do that at a podium. A woman made a phone call to her father on Christmas Eve and then disappeared into a silence that has lasted 10 years. The Federal Bureau of Investigation is working the file. The profilers are running the analysis, the reward is posted, and somewhere in Shelby County, Alabama, someone knows exactly what happened to Julie Danielle Ray on Christmas Day 2015 and has not said so. Danny Ray disappeared, and no one noticed fast enough. The next case everyone noticed immediately. The problem was that what they noticed did not add up. Those 6 people were adults who disappeared all at once.
Story time.
Empire, Alabama is simply not a place that most people outside of Walker County have ever heard of. It sits quietly in the western part of the state, deep in coal country. Think of a landscape shaped by worked-over hills, scrubby second-growth forest, and a heavy economic exhaustion. This exhaustion settles into a community when the industry that built it spends generations contracting. For more than a century, the coal seams under Walker County powered Alabama's industrial development. The people who worked them built entire communities here, churches, schools, and small businesses. Basically, it was the dense civic fabric of a place that was, for a long time, completely alive with purpose. But that purpose has been receding for decades. What it leaves behind is a specific kind of landscape. It is the type of environment that exists in the wake of extractive industry. Quiet roads, shuttered storefront, and empty buildings that outlived their function. Now, they just sit on the edge of fields, waiting for nobody. Whoa. Walker County, as it turns out, has one of the highest poverty rates in Alabama. Over the years, it has also maintained one of the higher rates of unsolved crimes in the state. Those two facts are not unconnected. Consider the reality. Understaffed law enforcement agencies, underfunded investigative infrastructure, and community where official institutions have not always shown up the way they were supposed to. These are the exact conditions that cases fall into, and they stay there. The case of Eric Cates fell directly into those conditions back in 2015. It has not come back out since. Actually, what is known about the death of Eric Cates is limited. It is restricted in the way that cases from low-coverage, under-resourced areas often are. This is not because nothing happened. Rather, what occurred did not generate the documentation, a sustained public record that would make a complete account possible. Here, the facts available from regional cold case records and Walker County sources are as follows. Eric Cates was a Walker County resident in 2015. His body was found inside his burned pickup truck on an isolated back road behind an abandoned school building in the Empire area of Walker County. His dog, named Gypsy, was also in the truck. The fire that consumed the vehicle also destroyed much of the physical evidence. The very evidence that might have explained how Eric and Gypsy came to be in that truck, behind that building, on that road. Those questions have not been publicly answered. Every single element of that scene raises a deep question. Not one of them has been publicly resolved. Let us start with the location. An abandoned school building on an isolated back road in Walker County is not a place that a person ends up by ordinary accident. It does not fit the logic of a routine day. Abandoned schools in rural Alabama are simply not destinations. They are not odd routes to anything. They are buildings left behind by communities that once used them. Structures that sit empty and deteriorating off roads that most people stopped having a reason to travel down years ago. Getting to a location like that requires either knowing where it is and going there deliberately or, well, being brought there. The truck was behind the school. Not on the road nearby, mind you, but directly behind the structure itself. This implies a deliberate turn off a road that itself requires a conscious decision to travel. That geography is not consistent with a random stopping point. It is consistent with a destination. Consider the dog. Gypsy was in the truck with Eric when the scene was discovered. That detail carries two possible readings, and neither resolves cleanly. In one reading, the dog was simply loyal in the visual way that dogs are loyal, always with its owner because that was where the dog always belonged. It is a detail that signifies the fidelity dogs are known for. In the other reading, the presence of a dog in a burned truck on a back road behind an abandoned school is part of a constructed or controlled scene. In that scenario, the dog's presence is either incidental to what happened before the fire, or it serves as evidence of how contained the situation was before it ended. What Gypsy's presence actually means depends entirely on facts about what preceded the fire, and those facts are not part of any public record that is currently available. The fire itself requires deep consideration. Vehicles do not spontaneously combust in ways that thoroughly destroy them and everything inside them on isolated back roads behind buildings that no one is watching. A vehicle fire thorough enough to consume physical evidence is a fire that was either deliberately set or resulted from something catastrophic. An explosion, a fuel failure, or a sequence of events that carries an explanation. In the absence of any public accounting of what caused the blaze, the fire becomes a wall. A barrier between the physical scene and whatever happened before it. Someone knows what caused that fire. Whether that person is alive, whether they remain in Walker County, or whether they have ever spoken to anyone about what they know, none of that is part of the available public record. There is a question about the timeline that the available public sourcing does not fully answer. It is one that a documentarian preparing a full narrative account of this case would need to resolve before finalizing this section. Was Eric Cates reported missing before his remains were found? Or was the discovery of the truck the first indication that anything was wrong? The distinction matters immensely for the shape of the story. If he was reported missing first, there is a distinct window between his last confirmed sighting and the discovery of the truck that carries investigative meaning. If the discovery was the first indication of his death, the investigative starting point was the scene itself. Either way, the outcome, man found dead in a burned truck behind an abandoned school with no public resolution, remains the same. But the investigative path differs. And the path matters for understand what was done and what was not done. Here is the critical context that frames everything about this case. Walker County in 2015 was a county with documented limitations in its investigative infrastructure. Cases that required sustained forensic attention, multi-agency coordination, and the kind of resource investment that complex vehicle fire scenes demand did not always receive it. This is not an accusation directed at any individual investigator or department. It is a structural reality documented in various forms in reporting on Walker County's criminal justice system over the years. A burned truck behind an abandoned school in the Empire area occupied a very different position in the investigative queue in 2015 than the same scene would have in a better resourced county. That is not a statement about the value of Eric Cates' life. It is a statement about what structural under-resourcing produces. And those outcomes in Walker County have too often meant cases that go cold quickly and stay cold indefinitely. There is a dimension to cases like Eric Cates' that rarely gets named directly, and it is worth naming here. The cases that receive sustained investigative attention, the ones that eventually produce arrests, convictions, confessions, and answers, tend to share certain characteristics. They involve victims whose disappearances or deaths generate media attention that translates into political pressure on law enforcement. They involve communities with the social capital and financial resources to sustain private investigative efforts when official channels slow down. They involve families who know how to navigate official bureaucracies, who have access to legal counsel, or who understand how to use media as a lever.
Story time.
The wilderness has a terrifying way of swallowing secrets whole, you know? For Glenn and Bessie Hyde, a newlywed couple seeking the ultimate thrill, the Grand Canyon was supposed to be a stepping stone to global fame. Instead, well, it became a historical mystery with more twists and turns than the Colorado River itself. Glenn was born in Idaho back in 1898 and grew up working on his family's farm. He was a deeply experienced outdoorsman. The guy built his own boats. He mastered wild rivers. By 1926, he had already successfully run the treacherous Salmon and Snake Rivers in Idaho. Then there was Bessie. Born in West Virginia in 1905, she had this intensely artistic bohemian streak. Poetry, theater, painting, she chased them all. The two actually met as passengers on a ship traveling to Los Angeles in 1927, and they felt an instant electric connection. At the time, Bessie was unhappily married to another man, but she obtained a quick divorce the following year. Get this? What for fuck? One day after her divorce was finalized, Bessie married Glenn on April 10, 1928. For their honeymoon, Glenn didn't suggest a quiet resort. He proposed an incredibly ambitious journey. He would build a custom boat, and together they would run the rapids of the Colorado River straight through the Grand Canyon. If they succeeded, Bessie would make history as the first woman ever documented to navigate the Grand Canyon in this way. But this intrepid duo was not planning on breaking just one barrier, right? They were planning on setting the absolute record for the fastest navigation of the Grand Canyon by boat. Beyond the pure thrill of exploration, the couple saw this journey as a direct path to fame and fortune. They planned to write a book about their adventure and go on a massive lecture tour recounting their exploits. In the late 1920s, such daring exploits completely captured the public's imagination. Charles Lindbergh had recently flown across the Atlantic, and adventurers were celebrated as literal heroes. Glenn and Bessie hoped their river voyage would catapult them into that pantheon of legendary explorers. At ages 29 and 22 respectively, the newlyweds eagerly set out to make their mark. On October 20th, 1928, exactly 6 months after their wedding, Glenn and Bessie launched their honeymoon adventure in the town of Green River, Utah. Glenn had constructed a sturdy, 20-foot wooden flat-bottom boat suitable for heavy rapids. Local rivermen took one look at the homemade craft and shuddered. They openly remarked that it looked ominously like a coffin, warning the couple that few amateurs ever attempted the Colorado's rapids in such boats. Undeterred, the Hydes pushed off down the Green River, which feeds into the Colorado, aiming to reach Needles, California by early December. To put this in perspective, only about 50 people had ever navigated the entire Grand Canyon by boat at that time. 50. That bet underscores the sheer audacity of the attempt. Surprisingly, the first weeks of the voyage went relatively smoothly. Honestly, it is pretty wild given the extreme difficulty of the voyage and the fact that Bessie was completely inexperienced in rapid river conditions. Glenn's river running experience and careful preparation paid off as they traversed Utah's Labyrinth and Cataract Canyons and entered Arizona. But the Colorado River and the Grand Canyon were more formidable than anything Glenn had ever seen. In letters to his family, he described the rapids as longer and fiercer than those he had encountered elsewhere. The journey was not without major scares. At one point, Glenn was tossed clean out of the boat, and Bessie had to physically pull him back in. Another rapid nearly swept Bessie overboard. Still, by mid-November, the couple had traveled over 200 miles and reached Bright Angel Creek in the Grand Canyon. It was a remarkably fast run for the era. That said, they no longer had any meaningful chance of breaking any speed records, which changed their plans slightly. On November 15, 1928, with the most dangerous stretch of river still ahead, Glenn and Bessie decided to pause their river trek. They hiked up the steep Bright Angel Trail to Grand Canyon Village of the South Rim to resupply and rest. During this brief layover, the Hydes drew a ton of attention. They were interviewed by a reporter from the Denver Post, and their bold trip was noted by tourists and locals all along the canyon rim. The famed Grand Canyon photographer Emery Kolb welcomed them into his studio right at the rim. Kolb had twice run the river himself and knew its perils intimately. He took a now famous photograph of the couple standing at the canyon's edge on November 17, 1928. Observing them, Kolb noted that Bessie appeared completely worn out and deeply apprehensive about continuing the journey. He also observed that Glenn was extremely exhausted but determined, perhaps to the detriment of the couple's safety. Emery Kolb urged the newlyweds to postpone the rest of the trip until spring. He even offered them additional safety gear, like life jackets and inner tube. Glenn refused all assistance, insisting he and Bessie were strong swimmers and determined to finish the trip without such help. According to Kolb, Glenn declared, quote, "I'm gonna do it without life jackets or else." It was a defiant statement that in hindsight sounds incredibly foreboding. It appears they did not take these basic safety precautions under the belief that going without them would make their story more sensationalistic for the public. On November 16th, they encountered a wealthy adventurer named Gilbert Sutro at Phantom Ranch and agreed to give him a short ride downriver. Sutro rode with Glenn and Bessie for a couple of days, and on November 18th, 1928, they dropped him off at a location called Hermit Camp. Gilbert Sutro would be the last person to ever see Glenn and Bessie alive. The hides continued downstream, melting into the canyon's deep isolation. Glenn and Bessie never arrived at their destination. They had expected to finish their voyage and meet family in Needles, California by early December. When the scheduled date passed with absolutely no word from the hides, concern rapidly grew into panic. Alarmed by the overdue newlyweds, Glenn's father, a man named Rollin Hyde, launched a vigorous search effort almost immediately. In December 1928, Rollin traveled to the Grand Canyon and organized multiple search parties. Experienced river runners, including Emery Kolb and his brother Ellsworth, joined the effort. Rollin also enlisted experienced Native American trackers to scour the canyon rims for any sign of the couple. Such was the mounting dread that the United States Secretary of War was actually convinced to authorize an aerial search of the Grand Canyon. This was a dramatic, unprecedented measure in those days. On December 19, 1928, an Army aircraft scouting the canyon finally spotted something. The Hyde's boat, adrift in the icy Colorado River. It was floating upright in a calm stretch of water near River Mile 237, not far from the end of the Grand Canyon at the lower Granite Gorge. A few days later, on Christmas Eve, December 24th, Emery Kolb reached the abandoned boat and inspected it. Mysteriously, the vessel was in excellent shape. It had not been smashed up, as some may expect in a fatal rapids accident. The boat was completely upright and undamaged, merely holding about a foot of water inside. Even more puzzling, all of the couple's supplies were still neatly stowed. Glenn and Bessie's personal belongings remained strapped in place. Their food provisions, cooking gear, blankets, and even heavy winter clothing remained strapped into place. Amongst the other significant items found aboard were Bessie's diary and the camera containing photographs of their trip. Absolutely nothing appeared to be missing, except for the glaring fact that Glenn and Bessie were nowhere to be found. Searchers combed the area for clues. They discovered footprints and a campsite believed to be the Hyde's last camp around River Mile 225 or 226, near Diamond Creek. The diary recovered from the boat provided a tantalizing glimpse into the final days of their journey. Bessie's last entry was dated November 30th, 1928, nearly 2 weeks after the Hydes were last seen by Sutro. In that entry, Bessie noted that they had successfully cleared the rapid at the 231-mile mark and were likely ahead of schedule, having regained lost time. Now, pushing hard to regain lost time implies they might have been taking severe, unnecessary risks just to make their story more appealing to the media, right? This suggested they had survived many days beyond November 18th and successfully navigated some of the canyon's hardest rapids. By all evidence, the Hydes had been making good progress and were within about 40 miles of their goal in early December. One possible clue came from a canyon prospector who reported seeing a brown leather jacket floating in the river around the time of the Hydes' disappearance. Bessie was known to wear a brown leather jacket, raising the grim possibility that she had been tossed into the water. That said, the jacket was never recovered, and that clue ended up amounting to nothing. Despite exhaustive searches by land, air, and water, no bodies or definitive traces of Glenn or Bessie were ever found. The official investigation eventually concluded without a clear resolution. No remains meant no way to say for certain what happened. Investigators presumed the couple had met with a tragic accident in the canyon. In the absence of other evidence, authorities believed that at some point in early December, the Hyde's boat struck hidden rocks in a rapid near mile 232. It is believed that this forceful strike ejected both Glenn and Bessie into the cold, swift river. Given that neither had worn life jackets, the strong currents could have quickly swept them under. On paper, the Hydes were declared dead by drowning, but the lack of concrete proof left the case frustratingly open-ended. The disappearance of Glenn and Bessie Hyde made massive headlines and captivated the public throughout 1928 and 1929. Here was a daring young couple who ventured into the wild for their honeymoon and simply vanished. Newspapers repeatedly recounted their adventurous spirits and the enigma of their empty boat. At a time when Grand Canyon expeditions were front-page news, the Hyde's fate became one of the great unsolved mysteries of the American West. It had all the ingredients of an enduring myth, high-stakes adventure coupled with a completely impossible disappearance. The story would continue to spark curiosity and conjecture for decades to come. In the immediate aftermath of the failed expedition, most people accepted the simple explanation that Glenn and Bessie Hyde had suffered a fatal mishap on the river. Authorities noted the treacherous nature of the rapids at mile 232, which had a history of wrecking boats and was considered the likeliest point of disaster. However, the very mystery that made the Hyde story famous also invited deep speculation. With no bodies recovered and some puzzling aspects, like the boat being completely undamaged, alternative theories began to circulate in the years following 1928. Even early on, those close to the case pondered different scenarios. Emery Kolb theorized that perhaps disaster struck while they were scouting a rapid on foot. You see, river runners often walk along the shore to examine dangerous rapids before running them, right? Kolb speculated that one of the Hydes might have slipped into the water, and the other jumped in to attempt a rescue, leading both to be swept away. Glenn's father, Rollin, had a different idea. He wondered if the couple might have encountered trouble with a rapid, decided to abandon the river, and tried to hike out of the canyon on foot. In Rollin's scenario, Glenn and Bessie could have gotten lost in the wilderness and died of exhaustion and exposure in a remote area. However, search teams never found footprints or tracks leading away from the river, which some believe makes this highly unlikely. Rumors also took hold, and with Emery Kolb playing such a prominent role in finding the boat, some whispers cast suspicion on him. These unfounded suspicions gained little traction until many years later, when a grisly discovery on Kolb's property would revive such talk. But, well, I will come back to that in a moment. Others looked to the Hydes themselves for answers. One dark theory suggested that perhaps Glenn, described by friends as determined and occasionally stubborn, might have lost his temper and harmed Bessie during an argument. Conversely, some speculated Bessie might have grown desperate to escape the perilous journey and slain Glenn. Both of these ideas led down the rabbit hole of theories that either one of them may have escaped and lived out the rest of their life under a new identity. Decades passed, yet the story of the Hydes refused to fade away. In 1971, 43 years after the disappearance, a startling claim made headlines and briefly suggested a very different ending to the tale. That year, an elderly woman named Elizabeth Cutler joined a commercial rafting trip down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. As the group swapped stories around a campfire near Diamond Creek, the quiet older woman calmly announced to her fellow rafters, "I am Bessie Hyde." She told a brutal story of how she allegedly had to slay her husband in self-defense. After capturing headlines and intense attention, the authorities investigated her, and she was determined to have fabricated the entire thing. She was a retired psychology professor who, and I am not joking here, said she made the false claim as a social experiment. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Elizabeth Cutler basically dropped the "it is just a prank, bro" defense in 1971. Truly, she was decades ahead of her time. But then, things got even weirder. And trust me, this will not be the last time I drop that line. Another twist came to light in 1992 with the death of legendary river guide Georgie Clark. Georgie was a pioneering woman in the Grand Canyon rafting community, famous for her own river exploits. After she passed away, friends sorting through her belongings found some highly curious items, including the marriage certificate of Glenn and Bessie Hyde. Further, they found a birth certificate for a woman named Bessie DeRoss. These discoveries led to rampant speculation that Georgie Clark had choose-bum Bessie. Living under a new name. The coincidence of the name Bessie, the possession of the Hyde's documents, and Georgie's secretive nature fueled this theory in the public imagination. However, historians quickly noted that Georgie Clark's early life was well documented and did not match Bessie's biography at all. No credible evidence ever tied Georgie to the Hyde case beyond those curious artifacts, but some people still theorize the two may have been one and the same. But then things got even weirder yet again. Meanwhile, a more concrete discovery had been made years earlier that cast suspicion right back on Emery Kolb. In 1976, Emery Kolb died at the age of 95, having lived at the Grand Canyon for decades after the hides vanished. In 1977, as Kolb's historic studio was being sorted and cleaned, workers made a gruesome find in a boathouse on the property. A skeleton stuffed inside an old wooden box. The remains appeared to be that of a young adult male. The unknown skeleton's height and build roughly matched Glenn Hyde, and chillingly, a bullet was found lodged in the skull. This discovery spurred sensational rumors that Kolb, one of the last to see the Hydes alive, might have slain Glenn and hidden his body for nearly 50 years. Some theorized that Emery had slain Glenn after having become infatuated with Bessie. What happened to Bessie in this version of events varied, but in the end it would not matter due to a major forensic break in 2008. Finally, in 2008, modern forensic efforts solved the riddle of the skeleton and officially cleared Emery Kolb's name. The skeleton was eventually linked to an individual who voluntarily departed the world in 1933. But it begged the question, why was a photographer and river runner keeping human remains? A deep dig through the historical archives eventually produced what many view as a satisfactory answer. Emery Kolb had served a variety of official roles in the region, and around 1933 he had served as a representative of the local coroner. It is suspected that Emery collected the skeleton and then simply, improperly stored it. Nearly a century has passed since Glenn and Bessie Hyde set off down the Colorado River chasing adventure and a place in the record books. What was meant to be the journey of a lifetime instead became a dark, unsolved chapter in wilderness lore.
Story time.
When you sit with the case of Felicia Cochran, actually the way it started so completely ordinary is what makes its ending so quietly devastating within Alabama's cold case records. Felicia Ed Carlinessa Cochran was 26 years old. This was the summer of 1992. She grew up in Alabama. By that July, she lived with her mother in Pell City, a small municipality in St. Clair County, positioned right along the eastern shore of Logan Martin Lake. It sits roughly 35 miles east of Birmingham along Interstate 20. It isn't a remote place, The geography doesn't make disappearances feel inevitable. It has neighborhoods, churches, the unremarkable suburban familiarity of a mid-sized Alabama town, a place where people head to the beauty salon on a Friday evening fully expecting to come home, where a gray 1987 Nissan Sentra pulling out of a driveway at 6 o'clock is just a car, just an errand, basically a mother running out for a couple of hours. Felicia had 3 children, separated from her husband at the time. She stayed at her mother's house, temporary arrangement in the way life sometimes requires. By every account from people who knew her, she was not someone who drifted. She stayed present, checking in with her family constantly. She was the type of mother who asked her kids if they wanted to tag along on small errands, keeping them close, making sure people knew her location and her expected return time. That matters. It establishes the baseline against which everything that followed becomes impossible to explain. So on the evening of July 11th, 1992, at approximately 6 o'clock, Felicia walked out of her mother's house. She told her 10-year-old daughter she was heading to the beauty salon, asked if she wanted to come. Her daughter said no. Felicia got into her gray Nissan Sentra. She drove away toward Birmingham. Family reports indicate she made it to the salon. She attended her appointment. The day was ordinary up to that specific point. An errand completed. A woman heading back through a summer evening toward her mother's house, her children, the rest of her night. She never arrived. Here is the critical detail. It needs to land slowly because, the geography of this is everything. Less than 12 hours after Felicia left Pell City, her car was found. Not in Birmingham, not pulled over on the side of the interstate, not parked outside the salon with a flat tire. Her gray 1987 Nissan Sentra turned up on an isolated road in Talladega County, a completely different county, positioned roughly southeast of Pell City, the opposite direction from Birmingham, where the salon was located. The car had been abandoned. It had been burned. The fire was thorough, deliberate. Whatever the interior of that vehicle might have told investigators, trace evidence, fingerprints, the story held by the steering wheel, was gone. Felicia was not inside the car. She has not been seen or heard from since July 11th, 1992. Sit with the geography for a moment. It refuses to be rationalized away. She left Pell City heading northwest. The burned car appeared in Talladega County southeast. That is not the direction of the salon. It isn't the direction of home. There is no logical reason for her to travel there on a summer evening after a routine hair appointment, right? For her car to end up where it did, something intervened. Something redirected her, moved her across county lines, and ended with her vehicle on fire in a location she had no reason to visit. Someone made a decision that night, possibly multiple decisions. They were made quickly. The timeline between her departure and the discovery of the burned car was under 12 hours. This is where it stops being a standard missing persons case. It assumes a much colder shape. Vehicles do not accidentally combust, then come to rest on a back road in a county the driver had no reason to visit. The burning was an act of deliberate destruction. The speed of it, accomplished within hours of her disappearance, points in one of two directions. Either someone moved the car and burned it in a panic because things went wrong fast, or they moved it and burned it because they had already planned for this exact outcome. Neither scenario ends well for Felicia. The subsequent investigation was, by most public accounts, limited. The case received some early regional coverage, then it went quiet. Not because there was nothing to find, but because resources and attention were not sustained. There are well-documented patterns regarding how missing persons cases receive coverage in the United States. Felicia Cochran's case has been highlighted in more recent years by advocates. The Black and Missing Foundation, the podcast The Vanished, the publication Our Black Girls. They have worked to bring her story back into public view. Her case number is MP2352. She remains classified as endangered missing. The Pell City Police Department holds the case. The phone number for tips is 205-884-3334. Family members have stated publicly for years that they believe they know who was responsible. They have said this clearly, naming someone from within their own circles. That individual was never arrested. No charges were filed. No person of interest was formally identified by law enforcement in connection with her disappearance. Because the standard here is official establishment rather than family belief, no name appears in this account. What can be stated is that the family's certainty, sustained across more than 3 decades, is one of the most quietly devastating features of this case. This is a family that believes they know the truth, watching nothing happen. The burned car in Talladega County remains entirely unexplained publicly. The route she would have taken from Birmingham southeast through multiple county lines onto an isolated back road has never been accounted for. There is no public record of witnesses who saw her car that evening after she left Birmingham. No public record of anyone who saw her in Talladega County. Fire consumed the physical evidence. Silence consumed everything else. There has been no financial activity connected to Felicia Cochran since July 11, 1992. No bank withdrawals, no social security activity, no phone records or letters. 30-plus years of total silence from a woman who, by every existing description, was not someone who disappeared by choice. She had 3 children. A mother whose driveway she pulled out of at 6 o'clock on a summer evening, fully intending to return. Her daughter, the 10-year-old who said no to the beauty salon that Friday evening, grew up. She eventually wrote a letter to her mother. The letter has been shared publicly. One line in it is almost impossible to read without feeling it deeply. She wrote, "Had I known that would be the last time I would see you, my answer would have been unquestionably yes. A child who declined a car ride. A mother driving into a summer evening. A burned car on a back road in the wrong county. 30 years of a family carrying an answer that no official capacity has ever confirmed. Felicia Cochran was taken alone."
Story time.
On June 2, 2015, a routine modern rafting expedition through the Grand Canyon turned into an equally baffling mystery. Morgan Heimer, a 22-year-old river guide from Cody, Wyoming, was leading a commercial rafting trip along the Colorado River. Heimer was an experienced outdoorsman, a strong swimmer, and a seasoned guide familiar with the canyon's perils. That afternoon, day 6 of an 8-day trip, the group stopped near a landmark called Pumpkin Springs at River Mile 213 for a side hike and some cliff jumping fun. As clients took turns leaping from a low rock ledge into the water, Heimer assisted them, ensuring everyone's safety. Once the last client had jumped, Heimer mentioned to the lead guide that he was going to take a short break while they prepared to head back to the boats. The lead guide stepped away briefly to speak with a guest, but when he turned around, Morgan was nowhere to be seen. At first, no one panicked. It was assumed that Heimer had simply wandered off for a moment of solitude or to relax out of the sun. He was last observed at approximately 4 in the afternoon, standing on that riverside ledge with his guide gear on, including his life vest. He was also carrying a distinctive purple water bottle, which park officials desperately hoped would be a significant clue going forward. There was no splash, no cry for help, no obvious sign of an accident. One moment he was part of the group, and the next, well, he had vanished almost into thin air. Hours passed with the team assuming their guide would reappear after his break. It was not until around 7 in the evening, when Morgan failed to show up at camp for dinner, that serious concerns set in. The other party members searched the immediate area, calling out his name and scanning the river's edge, but there was absolutely no trace of Morgan. As dusk fell, with still no sign of the young guide, the group realized something was very wrong and placed a satellite phone call to park authorities to report him missing. Early the next morning, Grand Canyon National Park rangers launched a major search and rescue operation. A helicopter crew flew to the area at first light on June 3rd, inserting rangers near the spot where Morgan was last seen. 3 ground teams fanned out along the rocky banks while a boat team scoured the river. Searchers faced grueling conditions, and the summer heat was extremely intense. Despite these challenges, they combed diligently through an extensive area, covering roughly a 14-mile stretch of river and about 4 miles of adjacent land around Pumpkin Springs. They looked for any clue, a piece of clothing, footprints, his purple water bottle, or the dark life vest that might have been caught on rocks or river debris. When initial sweeps found nothing, the search radius was expanded westward downriver toward the Diamond Cakeout. This is a popular exit point for rafting trips, about 12 miles beyond where Morgan disappeared. The idea was to ensure that if he had been carried downstream, no stretch of riverbank would be left uninspected. Interviews were conducted with everyone on the trip, and even with other river groups who had been in the area, just in case someone had seen something that might help explain what happened. But day after day, the canyon yielded absolutely no secrets. There were no signs of a struggle or an animal encounter, and no evidence that Heimer had attempted to hike out of the canyon on foot. By June 8th, after 6 full days of intensive searching by air, water, and land, not a single clue to Morgan's fate had turned up. With heavy hearts, officials made the difficult decision to scale back the operation. The search was transitioned to a limited mode, meaning rangers and pilots would keep an eye out for any telltale signs during routine patrols. But the large-scale hunt was suspended. Morgan Heimer's disappearance left both investigators and loved ones grasping for answers. Here was a capable guide intimately familiar with the dangers of the river, equipped with a life jacket and survival knowledge, yet he had vanished without leaving even a footprint behind. In the immediate aftermath, the working theory was that Morgan must have somehow fallen into the Colorado River and drowned. His body was likely swept away by the strong current. This theory made sense to many. The river was swift and powerful, and even with a personal flotation device, an accident in certain rapids or whirlpools could pin a person underwater. If he was caught in an underwater crevice or entangled in debris, his remains might not surface for a long time, if ever. Rescuers noted that given Morgan's skills and fitness, they initially believed he would be easy to find, which made the complete lack of results even more troubling. As days passed with no sign of him, the presumption of a fatal water accident grew stronger, simply because no other scenario had any supporting evidence. In the absence of answers, several theories persist among those who follow the case. The prevailing theory remains that Morgan fell into the Colorado River and succumbed to a tragic accident. Perhaps he lost his footing on the wet rock, got too close to the edge, and the river's swift current did the rest. If so, the Colorado may have carried him far downstream or pinned him in a submerged pocket, explaining why extensive searches failed to recover a body or even a piece of gear. Another theory, though it is much harder to believe given his experience, is that he walked inland for a moment and got fatally injured or lost. Did he step away to find a private spot or admire the view, only to fall into the labyrinth of hidden cliffs and deep crevices away from the water? The area is notoriously unforgiving. Even a brief walk could turn deadly if you slip into a concealed ravine. But honestly, given Morgan's deep familiarity with wilderness environments, this seems highly improbable. He knew the dangers better than almost anyone, right? Moreover, the intensive land search found absolutely nothing within a quarter-mile radius where such an accident would have occurred, leaving park officials highly skeptical of the land loss theory. Other, more sinister activities have also been suggested, from foul play to potential supernatural explanations. However, neither of these theories have any evidence to back them up, and they remain highly speculative. Today, nearly a decade later, the disappearance of Morgan Heimer remains an open case and an enduring heartbreak for his family, friends, and the tight-knit river guide community. The National Park Service keeps Morgan on a list of cold cases, and the investigation remains officially ongoing in a limited capacity.
Story time.
Mountain Brook is one of the wealthiest municipalities in Alabama. It sits just southeast of Birmingham, tucked into the Appalachian foothills in Jefferson County. A city of tree-lined streets, large homes, and a public school system regularly ranking among the best in the state. Like it's the kind of place where children of successful families attend well-resourced schools. They compete in well-funded athletic programs, accumulating the credentials that open the right doors, arriving at graduation with their futures already visible on the horizon. College acceptances, scholarships, the clean sense that life is unfolding exactly as it should. By the material measures American society applies to such places, it is a city where the worst things are simply not supposed to happen. That belief, the idea that certain places are insulated from certain outcomes, is part of what made the case of Natalie Holloway hit the country with such immense force. It is worth naming because that force had real consequences. Consequences for how the case was investigated, how it was covered, and what it meant to people watching from the outside. Natalie Ann Holloway was 18 years old in May 2005. She grew up in Mountain Brook. She attended Mountain Brook High School. By the spring of her senior year, she had built a record that is easy to describe and difficult not to be moved by in retrospect. National Honor Society, student government, dance team, a straight-A average across 4 years, a full academic scholarship to the University of Alabama, the scholarship she had worked for, earned, and was, as of the second week of May 2005, less than 4 months away from using. She was a young woman standing at the beginning of something good. So, on May 26, 2005, Natalie and approximately 124 of her Mountain Brook classmates flew to Aruba for a 5-day senior graduation trip. The island sits off the coast of Venezuela in the southern Caribbean. It is a Dutch territory, tourist-facing, known for its flat, windswept terrain, its white beaches, and a concentrated strip of hotels and restaurants oriented toward visitors arriving year-round. The Mountain Brook group stayed at the Holiday Inn in Palm Beach, located in the north end of the island. The trip was organized and chaperoned. By design, it was a supervised celebration of the end of high school, the kind of trip senior classes from affluent American schools take to island destinations, with the implicit understand that it will be fun, controlled, and safe. 4 nights passed without significant incident. The group moved through the trip the way these trips usually move: beach during the day, restaurants at night, accumulating memories of a last moment together before everyone scatters to different campuses and entirely different lives. It was exactly what it was supposed to be. Until last night. The night of May 29th into the early hours of May 30th, 2005 marked the final night of the trip. The return flight to Birmingham was scheduled for the morning of May 30th. The group received a midnight curfew for that last evening. Most of them ended up at Carlos and Charlie's, a bar and restaurant situated on the main tourist strip in Oranjestad, the island's capital city. It was a well-known stop for American visitors, a regular part of the landscape senior trip group moved through during their stays. The Mountain Brook group was there. They were not the only American group present. Natalie was at Carlos and Charlie's. She was photographed inside the venue. She was with classmates. She was also in contact that evening with a 17-year-old Dutch national named Joran van der Sloot, a young man who grew up on the island. His father, Paula van der Sloot, served as a judge within the Aruban legal system. Joran had been spending time with members of the Mountain Brook group across multiple nights of the trip. With van der Sloot that night were two brothers from Suriname who lived in Aruba, Deepak Kalpoe, 21, and his younger brother Satish, 18. In the early morning hours of May 30th, 2005, after midnight, at the very end of the trip's final night, Natalie Holloway left Carlos and Charlie's. She got into a gray Honda. Deepak Kalpoe drove. Joran van der Sloot and Satish Kalpoe were also in the vehicle. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing her enter that car. Classmates saw her leave. That remains the last confirmed sighting of Natalie Holloway by anyone not inside that vehicle. The flight to Birmingham departed the next morning without her. When chaperones realized she hadn't returned to the Holiday Inn and was missing for departure, the alarm was raised. By that afternoon, it became a missing persons case. Within days, it escalated into an international news story on a scale very few missing persons cases in American history have ever matched. The investigation that followed was extraordinary in its scope. It was prolonged in its failure. 3 countries, the United States, Aruba, and the Netherlands, were formally involved. The FBI deployed agents directly to the island. Private investigators funded by the Holloway and Twitty families worked parallel tracks. Alabama Governor Bob Riley issued a travel advisory discouraging Americans from visiting Aruba. Members of the United States Congress demanded investigations into the Aruban justice system. They searched the island thoroughly: beaches, salt flats, offshore areas, the ocean floor, in sectors painstakingly mapped out by investigators. Nothing was found. No body, no DNA at a crime scene, no physical evidence indicating where Natalie had gone after getting into that car. The ocean and the island gave absolutely nothing back. Joran van der Sloot was arrested twice in 2005, first in June, then again in September. He was released without charges both times. His account of what happened on the night of May 30th changed with each telling. In his initial version, he claimed he left Natalie on the beach near the hotel in the company of a security guard. Investigator quickly dismantled that claim. His story shifted again. He gave subsequent interviews where different details emerged, only to be walked back later. He was never formally charged in Aruba in connection with Natalie's disappearance. Eventually, he left the island, enrolled at a university in the Netherlands. He continued to live his life for years. In 2008, Dutch journalist and private investigator Peter de Vries released a hidden camera recording. It captured van der Sloot in conversation with an acquaintance. In the recording, he appeared to describe how Natalie died and how her body was disposed of at sea. Van der Sloot claimed the recording was manipulated. He argued his statements were taken out of context. He was briefly detained in the Netherlands following the tape's release, then released once more. The Aruban investigation still did not produce charges. Then, in May 2010, exactly 5 years after Natalie's disappearance, Joran van der Sloot traveled to Lima, Peru. On May 30th, 2010, the exact 5-year anniversary of the night Natalie vanished, he murdered a 21-year-old Peruvian woman named Stephanie Flores Ramirez inside a hotel room in the Miraflores district of Lima. Authorities arrested him. He was extradited back to Peru, convicted of first-degree murder, and sentenced to 28 years in a Peruvian prison. While incarcerated there, the United States charged him with extortion and wire fraud. These charges stemmed from his demands for money from Natalie's mother, Beth Holloway. He offered information about the location of her daughter's remains in exchange for cash, only to provide entirely false information. In June 2023, authorities extradited van der Sloot from Peru to the United States. He arrived in Alabama, the state where Natalie grew up, where her family still lived, where her mother spent 18 agonizing years without knowing what happened to her daughter. On October 18, 2023, inside a federal courtroom in Alabama, Joran van der Sloot pleaded guilty. As part of the proceedings, he finally admitted that he killed Natalie Holloway in Aruba during the early hours of May 30, 2005. He stated she struck her head on a concrete structure near the beach following a violent confrontation after she refused his advances. He claimed he subsequently arranged for her body to be disposed of in the ocean. Her body has never been recovered. The location of her remains is officially unknown. Whether the account Vandersloot provided in that Alabama courtroom represents the complete truth or merely a version shaped by the terms of a plea agreement has been publicly questioned. Investigators and members of the Holloway family believe certain details simply do not align with the physical evidence or the known timeline of that night. There is one more thing about the Holloway case that belongs in any honest accounting. Natalie's disappearance received a level of media saturation that generated intense, real investigative pressure. Cable news ran the case around the clock for months. Her family possessed the resources to hire private investigators, to travel internationally, to sustain pressure on a foreign government for years. Yet, it still took 18 years to secure a formal admission, and her body was never found. The families of the other 9 people on this list did not have those resources. They had Crime Stoppers tip lines, county sheriff's offices, the particular, grueling endurance that grief demands when institutions fail to show up the way they are supposed to. Natalie was 18 years old. She left Mountain Brook on May 26, 2005. She got into a car in the early hours of May 30th. She never came back. An Alabama judge declared her legally dead in 2012. 18 years later, the man who killed her stood in a courtroom in the state she had grown up in admitting what he had done. Her mother sat in that courtroom and listened. The answer finally came. Her daughter's body did not. Natalie Holloway's case became one of the most famous missing persons cases in American history. Well, what if I told you that a man with severe physical limitations went missing, and the only clue left behind was a hunter's game camera, capturing him walking deep into a dense forest alone? One like story of 6 friends that walk out of a nightclub together, but when they submerged car is found months later, one person is completely missing from the wreckage. Today, we are uncovering the dark truth behind disturbing cases where ordinary people stepped out of their front doors and disappeared forever. Stay tuned because the final story will absolutely blow your mind.
Story time.
In June of 2016, Floyd Roberts III, a 52-year-old high school teacher and former NASA engineer from Florida, went missing under completely inexplicable circumstances. Now, this wasn't an amateur. Roberts was an exceptionally experienced outdoorsman. He had joined 2 longtime friends for a rugged, backcountry trek through an incredibly isolated pocket of the Grand Canyon. He was thoroughly prepared with ample food, water, and detailed maps for what was scheduled to be a challenging 9-day expedition. Their itinerary required them to traverse the brutal Shivwits Plateau, descend toward the Colorado River, and finally exit the canyon on June 26th. For Roberts and his companions, this was supposed to be an incredible adventure. They had actually successfully completed a very similar, grueling trip back in 2010. But on the very first afternoon of their 2016 trek, Roberts vanished without a trace, triggering a massive search operation and leaving behind a baffling puzzle that remains completely unsolved to this day. It all fell apart on day 1, June 17, 2016. The trio encountered a steep hill near a landmark known as Kelly Tank. To save energy, they decided to split up, taking 2 different paths around the elevation to meet up just on the other side. His companions opted to climb directly over the hill, while Floyd decided to skirt around its base. When his friends crested the ridge and reached the designated meeting spot, Roberts was gone. He was nowhere to be seen. They waited, shouting his name into the vast silence, and eventually retraced their exact steps back to the split. Nothing. There was absolutely no sign of him. By the following morning, reality set in. They knew something was terribly wrong. They hiked for hours until they finally captured a weak cell signal to call for emergency help. Roberts was officially logged as a missing person with park authorities on June 18th, nearly 24 hours after he had walked around that hill. The National Park Service immediately mobilized a massive search and rescue mission. But the western portion of the Grand Canyon is profoundly remote, a labyrinth of vertical drops and dense brush that makes access a literal nightmare. Park rangers, elite wilderness trackers, and emergency rescue teams from 2 separate counties flooded the zone. They set up a command post right near his last known location to coordinate the grid search. Over the next 6 days, dozens of personnel scoured roughly 10 square miles of punishing canyon country on foot and from the air. The conditions were brutal. A massive heat wave had slammed the region, driving temperatures well past 100 degrees. The terrain itself was choked with thick brush, sudden cliffs, and treacherous ravines. Despite the extreme danger, searchers pushed through the heat day and night, desperate for a clue. Helicopters hovered dangerously low over the deep ravines, searching for the unmistakable bright red of his shirt or the blue of his backpack. Specialized tracking dogs were flown in to catch any lingering scent. A few potential clues did emerge. At one point, searchers discovered a set of shoe prints pressed into the dirt, but rangers could never definitively confirm they belonged to Roberts's boots. No other piece of his gear, no wrapper, no gear strap, ever turned up. By June 23rd, after exhausting every realistic option, officials had to scale back the operation. With no active leads left to follow, the mission shifted to a passive, limited search, leaving it up to rangers on routine patrols to keep an eye out. With a complete absence of physical evidence, several theories have been floated to explain how a man just disappears off the face of the earth. The primary explanations settle on a catastrophic fall, extreme disorientation leading to exposure, foul play, or perhaps a voluntary disappearance. One glaring possibility is that Roberts simply misplaced a step and plummeted into a hidden fissure or off a blind ledge. The Grand Canyon is packed with sheer drop-offs and deceptive topography. If he fell and was incapacitated or instantly killed, his body could easily be wedged in an obscured crevice that search teams bypassed. It happens. There are numerous documented cases in the Grand Canyon where a missing hiker's remains aren't recovered until years, sometimes decades later, hidden in some inaccessible slot canyon. Another prominent theory is that he became profoundly lost and succumbed rapidly to the elements. Despite his deep experience, the blistering heat and lack of water can cause rapid, severe cognitive decline. Floyd might have become disoriented, chosen the wrong direction while trying to locate his friends or a water source, and collapsed from heat stroke. If he managed to wander outside the active 10-square-mile search grid before dying, his remains would easily be missed in that massive geographical maze. Or maybe he crawled under a ledge for shade and perished out of sight. Naturally, investigators looked closely at foul play, but they found absolutely zero evidence to back it up. Authorities deemed it highly improbable that he ran into a hostile stranger in such a completely isolated, empty sector of the park. Furthermore, his hiking partners, father and daughter, who were his close, multi-decade friends, sounded the alarm as quickly as humanly possible given the lack of cell service. They cooperated fully, transparently, with every single agency and were ruled out as suspects almost immediately. Park investigators found no signs of a physical struggle, no blood, no disrupted earth at the scene. The total lack of criminal indicators makes foul play a highly remote theory, and most experts dismiss it entirely. Then there is the animal attack theory. Could a mountain lion have ambushed him and dragged him away? Highly unlikely. Cougar attacks are exceptionally rare, and there wasn't a single shred of physical evidence. No torn clothing, no blood trails to suggest a predatory encounter. Finally, some have speculated that Roberts chose that exact moment to intentionally vanish. The idea is that he used the remote trek as a perfect smokescreen to abandon his life and start fresh under a new identity. But honestly, those who knew him best completely reject this. He had a rewarding, stable career, deep family connections, and was genuinely thrilled about this specific hike. No motive, no hidden bank accounts, and no planning indicators ever surfaced. Because of that, authorities consider a voluntary disappearance the least likely scenario. Nearly 9 years have passed since Floyd Roberts walked around that hill, and the National Park Service still carries his file as an active, open missing persons investigation.
Story time.
Florence, Alabama sits in the northwest corner of the state along the southern bank of the Tennessee River in Lauderdale County. It is a university town, home to the University of North Alabama, with a small, historically rooted downtown, a music heritage tightly tied to the Muscle Shoals recording scene, and the kind of residential geography that expands outward from the city center into rural stretches of county highway and woodlands that push steadily toward the Tennessee state line. The further out you drive from the city, the quieter the roads get. Properties are set far back from the pavement, surrounded by trees, with driveways that feed onto state highways. It is the kind of terrain where a person who walks away from a house has a lot of directions to disappear into. It is a place where if something goes wrong, it can go wrong a very long way from anyone positioned to see it. Robert Deshaun Chilvers, known to his family and everyone who loved him as Sean, was 51 years old in September 2016. He was physically large, 6 feet 2 inches tall and weighing 240 pounds, with gray hair and blue eyes. But Sean moved through the world with a significant and heavily documented physical limitation. He had fused cervical vertebrae, structural condition in his neck and upper spine that had required multiple intense surgeries, leaving him with deep scars down the back of his neck extending into his back, as well as an ostomy scar from an additional medical procedure. Because of this, he walked with a highly pronounced limp. Every single step was effortful. Every single step was painful. He was absolutely not a man who could cover ground easily, or quietly, or at any real speed. He was not a man who would, under normal circumstances, ever choose to walk anywhere when he had direct access to a vehicle. That physical reality is one of the most vital facts in this entire case. Honestly, it becomes more important the further into the timeline you go, because the official account of how Sean left his house on the morning of September 17, 2016, requires you to believe something about him that his own body makes very hard to accept. By that September, Sean was living in a house at the 1200 block of Highway 141 in Florence, a property that had been at the absolute center of a legal dispute for months. A man named Darby had been attempting to evict Sean from the house in a sustained and highly aggressive way. He had shut off the power to the property in an effort to force Sean out. He had confiscated some of Sean's belongings and dumped them straight into the ditch in front of the house. He had attempted formal evictions that Sean successfully challenged through the courts and halted with an official court order. At the time of Sean's disappearance, a legal hearing was scheduled proceeding that would formally determine who had the right to the property. The hearing was coming. The court order was firmly in place. Sean had fought hard to stay, and he had been winning. And then, just a few months after his belongings were dumped in a ditch outside his own front door, he disappeared before the hearing could ever happen. He was living with a roommate at the time, a man named David Nix. According to Nix, on the morning of September 17, 2016, Sean left the residence sometime between 9 in the morning and noon. Nix told investigators that Sean had been highly emotional when he left, that he was crying, that he hugged Nix before walking out, and that he explicitly said, "I love you. I do not know when I will see you again." Nix said Sean then walked out the door, down the driveway, and right onto the road. He said he did not know where Sean was going. He said Sean left without his truck keys, without his phone, without his wallet, and without his medication, the daily medication he absolutely needed to manage documented health conditions. Well, Sean's family heard that account and simply did not believe it. It wasn't because they doubted Sean had been under immense stress. He had been managing a property dispute, documented substance abuse, and mental health challenges for months. An emotional farewell was plausible in that context. What they fiercely disputed was the physical mechanics of the story. A man with fused vertebrae and a pronounced limp. A man in chronic and significant pain. A man for whom every single step required massive effort. That man did not just leave his locked truck sitting in the driveway and walk away down a rural highway in a September morning. If Sean needed to go somewhere, he drove. The truck wasn't just convenient for Sean. For someone with his physical limitations, the truck was how he was able to move through the world at all. Finding it locked at home while Sean allegedly walked away on foot was, to his family, not a detail that needed further explanation. It was itself the explanation. Basically, something was deeply wrong with the story. Here is the critical detail that the physical evidence adds. Shortly after Sean was reported missing, officially logged with the Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department on September 19, 2016. Investigators located a trail camera image that placed Sean in the wooded area near County Road 178, close to the Tennessee state line, moving away from the residence in a northerly direction. That image was taken not long after the window in which Nick said Sean had walked away. It is the last confirmed visual record of Sean Chilvers that exists anywhere. A man with fused vertebrae and a painful limp, captured on a hunter's game camera, moving completely alone into dense Alabama woodland near the Tennessee state line. Without his phone, without his medication, without his wallet, moving north. Searches were conducted the following morning in the area where the camera image had placed him, but absolutely nothing was found. There was no trail of disturbance through the underbrush, no secondary sighting, and no physical evidence of where he had gone after that image was captured. The woodland along the Tennessee state line in that part of Lauderdale County is dense, largely undeveloped, and does not give things zip easily. Now, this is where the case turns dark, not through what Sean did, but through what the man who was last with him did afterward. In the days immediately following the disappearance, David Nix cleaned the interior of the home using bleach thoroughly. When Sean's family learned about this, they flagged it immediately. Like bleach cleaning of a residence after a person has gone missing from that residence is one of the most widely recognized indicators of an attempt to destroy biological trace evidence. It was not an ambiguous act. Nix then got rid of the vehicle he owned at the time of Sean's disappearance. Investigators found that his statements about the morning of September 17th were completely inconsistent. His account of the timeline shifted. A neighbor reported seeing Sean in Nix's company after the exact time that Nix said Sean had already left. And when Sean's family looked more closely at the period before the disappearance, they found what they described as evidence of a sustained pattern of physical abuse, mistreatment that Sean, isolated on a disputed rural property and dealing with his own health challenges, had been living inside. There is a dimension of this case that the family has pushed investigators on from the very beginning, and it concerns the property dispute in a more specific way than it is usually covered. The legal hearing that was scheduled was not an abstract proceeding. It was a proceeding in which Sean was the party who stood to win. He had the court order. He had successfully halted the evictions. He had established through the legal process a claim to the home that was strong enough to hold. His presence at that hearing mattered. His continued existence mattered to the outcome of that case. When he disappeared before the hearing could take place, the proceeding collapsed entirely. The person who had been trying to remove him from the property for months got exactly what they had been trying to get. Whether that connects to what happened to Sean is a question law enforcement has never publicly resolved. The family has not stopped asking it. The other dimension worth dwelling on is the physical one, because it bears repeating plainly. Sean Chilvers was a disabled man with fused cervical vertebrae, chronic pain, a pronounced limp, and documented mobility limitation. He left his locked truck at home. He left without his phone, his medication, and his wallet. He was then captured on a game camera in the woods near the Tennessee state line, which is not a route a man in his condition walks voluntarily in September without preparation, without supplies, if for reasons he did not communicate to anyone. The gap between the story that was told about how he left and the physical reality of who he was has never been closed by any official explanation. David Nix was never charged in connection with Sean's disappearance. He was questioned, he gave statements, but he was never formally named as a suspect, and sometime after the investigation settled into cold case status, Nix died. Whatever the bleach was covering, whatever the inconsistent statements were protecting, whatever actually happened on the morning of September 17, 2016, inside that house on Highway 141, he took it with him. The FBI placed Sean's case on the VICAP missing persons database. The Lauderdale County Sheriff's Department holds the investigation under case number LD 1602077. There has been no Social Security activity, no financial activity, and no confirmed sighting of Robert Deshaun Chilvers since that hunter's camera image on the morning of September 17, 2016. His family has continued advocating for the case publicly and has not stopped pushing for answers. In 2017, some of Sean's medication was found south of the residence. The camera had placed him going north. His medication turned out south. Between those two directions, between the last image of him alive and the pills pointing the wrong way, is the shape of a story that only one person could have told in full, and that person is gone.
Story time.
Case file. Heavenly Shea Ross. An 11-year-old girl left her house on a normal school morning. She never made it to the bus stop at the end of her street. The actual distance between her front door and the specific place where she vanished was less than half a mile. That took less than 10 minutes to walk. And it happened right in the morning, in the broad daylight, while her older sister was actually walking the exact same route, just mere steps ahead of her. Heavenly Shea Ross was simply called Shea by everyone who loved her. She was 11 years old, and she lived with her family in the Willowbrook Trailer Park in Northport. This is a city that sits just across the Black Warrior River from Tuscaloosa, situated in Tuscaloosa County in the west central part of Alabama. Northport is basically the kind of place that exists entirely in the long dark shadow of a larger, much better known city, which means unfortunately it receives far less attention, far less economic investment, and, as this specific case makes painfully clear, far less media coverage when things go terribly wrong. The Willowbrook Trailer Park was a quiet residential community of mobile homes and familiar faces, a place where children move freely in the very way that children typically do in close-knit neighborhoods, walking to their friends' houses, riding bikes along known dirt paths, navigating the intimate geography of their daily lives without any adult escort. Why? Because there had never been a single reason to need them. Shea had walked that exact path to her school bus stop dozens of times before that Tuesday morning in August. It was not a long walk. It was not a complicated walk. The bus stop was literally less than half a mile from her front door, a straight residential stretch right through a neighborhood she had known her entire life. It was a route so completely familiar she probably could have walked it in her sleep. On the morning of August 19th, 2003, Shea got ready for school and walked out the house. Her older sister Jamie, who is now known as Alex, had left just a few minutes before her, 5 to 10 minutes ahead, walking the exact same route toward the exact same bus stop. The sky was heavy, overcast. Rain was coming in the specific way that it does in Alabama in late summer, slowly, under immense atmospheric pressure, the kind of oppressive gray ceiling that drops just a little bit lower each hour before it finally opens up and pours. Shea walked out the door and started down the path toward the bus stop. Jamie was already way ahead of her, already out of sight. The morning was ordinary. The route was completely ordinary. Everything was exactly as it had been on every single other school morning. Jamie reached the bus stop. She waited. The bus finally came. She looked around for her sister. Shea was not there. She had never arrived. Somewhere in the brief space between the front door of their home in the Willowbrook Trailer Park and the designated bus stop at the end of the street, in a tiny window of less than 10 minutes, in the morning light, in a residential neighborhood she had navigated her entire childhood, Heavenly Shea Ross entirely disappeared. She was never seen alive again. Sit with the geography of what that actually means for a second. Less than half a mile, under 10 minutes of walking time. A distance so remarkably short, so deeply embedded in the daily texture of life in that neighborhood, that absolutely no one would have thought to watch it closely, or pay particular attention to who else might be quietly moving along it at that precise moment on that particular Tuesday. A child walking to a bus stop in her own neighborhood on a regular school morning is invisible in the best possible sense. It is just life, unremarkable and safe. The kind of thing that happens everywhere, every single day without incident. And yet, in that invisible stretch of pavement on that unremarkable morning, someone was there who absolutely should not have been. Someone saw Shea. Someone made a horrific decision in those 10 minutes. And in the 21 years since August 19th, 2003, that person has never been identified, charged, or held remotely responsible for what they did. The frantic search for Shea began almost as soon as it became undeniably clear she had not arrived at school. The Tuscaloosa County Violent Crimes Unit immediately opened the investigation. The Willowbrook community was thoroughly canvassed. Local residents were formally interviewed. Routes were repeatedly walked. The surrounding streets, the dense woods, and the adjacent areas were searched. Crime Stoppers was engaged. Law enforcement steadily extended the search radius outward from the trailer park right into the broader Northport area. One particular detail that emerged was incredibly significant, and it carries a haunting echo of Shannon Palmer's tragic case from 2 years earlier and 90 miles to the south. There was actually active commercial construction happening right near the path that Shea would have walked that morning. Construction sites bring workers. Workers are naturally present, moving through an area, passively watching the environment around them. They are, quite frankly, among the most likely categories of potential witnesses in a case exactly like this. Whether construction workers near Shea's specific route were ever fully identified and comprehensively interviewed, and what they may or may not have seen, has basically not been comprehensively addressed in public reporting. What is absolutely confirmed is that the exhaustive search in the days and weeks following her disappearance produced no meaningful public leads and no arrests. Shay's remains were eventually found. Her tragic death was officially ruled a homicide. Yet, no suspect has ever been publicly named. No person of interest has ever been formally identified by law enforcement in connection with her violent death. No arrest has ever been made. The Tuscaloosa Violent Crimes Unit still holds the case. Crime Stoppers can be directly reached at 205-752-7867. This is a confirmed horrific homicide, 2 full decades old, with absolutely no one ever charged. Here is the genuinely critical detail that makes this specific case so difficult to examine in complete isolation. Because in every structural and circumstantial respect that matters, it is not an isolated case. It is Shannon Palmer's exact case. 2 years later and 90 miles north. 11 years old, trailer park community, walking completely alone on a late summer morning. Gone in a matter of minutes, remains eventually found. Homicide officially confirmed, no arrest. The cases are chilling mirror images of each other. Same age, same type of neighborhood, same type of route, same season, same state, same heartbreaking outcome. The statistical probability that this is mere coincidence has been a persistent question that every single investigator who has examined both cases has had to deeply answer for themselves. The potential connection between Shay's case and Shannon's was not immediately dismissed. Multiple jurisdictions extensively examined what has come to be informally described as a 4-case corridor. Teresa Dean in Georgia in 1999, Shannon Palmer in Prattville in 2009, Shay Ross in Northport in 2003, and Tabitha Tudors in Nashville in 2003. The Associated Press publicly reported in August 2006 that dedicated investigators from multiple agencies were actively examining whether a definitive link between the cases actually existed. Interjurisdiction and communication definitely happened. The terrifying possibility of a single highly mobile offender or connected offenders moving rapidly through that exact geographic and temporal corridor was considered seriously enough to generate formal cooperative investigative work, but it was never definitively confirmed. The official position across whole relevant law enforcement agencies remains that these are entirely separate, completely unrelated incidents. But the corridor exists, whether or not it carries an official name. The dark pattern it describes. 4 girls, same age, same setting, same exact corridor, same era, and a complete staggering absence of resolution in every single one of them. That is not something that somehow becomes less significant just because it has not been proven in a court of law. Shay's mother, Beth Thompson, has frankly been one of the most persistent and clear-eyed public voices for her daughter's case across those long 2 decades. She appeared in the CBS 42 Missing Mysteries series back in November 2023. Still fiercely asking the very same questions she first asked in August 2003. Still bravely naming the systemic failures. Still showing up. One brilliant observation she made in that interview gets at something deeply structural, something that goes far beyond this one individual case. She specifically pointed to 2 Alabama child disappearance cases from 2019, a toddler named Cupcake McKinney and a teenager named Anaya Blanchard. Both of those recent cases were resolved relatively quickly, in significant part because of surveillance camera footage, business cameras, residential doorbell cameras, traffic cameras. Basically, the visual infrastructure that now completely saturates American residential life to a degree that would have been completely unimaginable back in 2003. Beth Thompson's point was devastatingly precise. If that exact infrastructure had existed in 2003, the monstrous person who took Shay might have been easily identified within a matter of days. They were not. The cameras were simply not there, the community did not possess them, and the precious window in which that visual evidence might have changed absolutely everything permanently closed more than 20 years ago. And it will not reopen. That is a profound statement about the true cost of uneven infrastructure, about which neighborhoods get the advanced tools that create accountability and which do not. About what those specific gaps cost in the irreversible terms of specific human lives. In this case, the life of a vibrant 11-year-old girl who should be exactly 32 years old today and is not. There is something else about this case that desperately deserves to be said plainly, because it rarely gets said plainly enough. The Willowbrook Trailer Park in Northport in 2003 was a predominantly working-class community. The families who lived there were absolutely not wealthy. They did not have the vast resources to casually hire private investigators, or privately fund independent forensic testing, or sustain massive media pressure across years and decades. What they had was simply each other, and the public systems that were supposed to serve them, and a standard Crime Stoppers line. When those public systems did not produce immediate results, when the investigation inevitably went cold, when the case tragically faded from regular news coverage, when the years began to relentlessly accumulate without any resolution, the crushing weight of that failure fell entirely on the family, on Beth Thompson, on Shay's grieving siblings, on a tight community that had already been terribly failed once by the absence of the infrastructure that might have caught the person responsible, and was now being failed again by the stark absence of sustained institutional attention. 21 years is a very long time to carry that heavy burden. Beth Thompson has carried it every single day. The person who forcibly took Shay from that route on August 19, 2003 is still entirely unidentified. They may still be living in Alabama. They may still be operating in that exact corridor. The precious forensic evidence that would finally name them has been carefully preserved. The forensic technology that could work with that evidence is vastly better now than it has ever been, and the case is still actively open. A child walked out of her front door on a gray August morning and headed toward a bus stop a few hundred yards away. Her sister was right ahead of her, on the exact same path. It was light outside, it was morning. It was a safe neighborhood she had known her whole life. In the agonizing few minutes between leaving that door and reaching that stop, someone was waiting on that route.
Story time.
September 25th, 2018 was supposed to be nothing more than an enjoyable afternoon hike for a mother and her daughter inside the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Well, they had no idea how quickly things would turn dark. 53-year-old Susan Clements set out onto a scenic trail near Clingman's Dome, which happens to be the absolute highest point in the entire park. The two of them anticipated a completely routine afternoon trek amid the early autumn beauty of the Smokies. Instead, by nightfall, Susan had utterly vanished into the misty mountains. Her disappearance sparked a massive, week-long search operation and left behind a baffling mystery that honestly continues to haunt anyone who remembers the case. So, who was Susan Clements? She was a mother of 3 from the Cincinnati area, visiting the Smokies on vacation with her youngest daughter, eager to share the wonders of the wilderness. She loved the outdoors and was highly active. Susan was definitely no novice hiker. In fact, earlier that exact week, she and her daughter had successfully tackled some of the park's more challenging trails, including paths with incredibly steep elevation changes. On this fateful Tuesday, their plan was relatively straightforward. Take the Forney Ridge Trail down to a scenic spot known as Andrews Bald, and then turn around to return to the Clingman's Dome parking area before dusk. It is a round trip of just a few miles, a pleasant day hike basic, not the kind of terrain that would normally pose any serious risk for an experienced person like Susan. They packed light, carrying no heavy gear or overnight supplies because they fully intended to be back at their vehicle by evening. That afternoon, the two of them set out from the trailhead in excellent spirits. They reached Andrews Bald and began the return leg of their hike in the late afternoon. But as they neared the end of the trail, close to Clingman's Dome, Susan's 20-year-old daughter made a sudden decision to go on ahead. She was a naturally faster hiker and really wanted to climb the short, steep path up to the Clingman's Dome observation tower for one final panoramic view. The plan was incredibly simple: split up briefly and meet right back at the parking lot. It was around 5 in the afternoon, and the daughter hurried ahead up the path, leaving Susan to continue at her own pace toward the parking area. Neither of them realized that this small separation would soon become a life-altering choice. When the daughter returned to the parking lot after her quick detour to the observation tower, she expected to find her mother waiting there, or at least see her walking down the trail. But Susan was nowhere to be found. At first, the daughter wasn't alarmed, like perhaps her mom was just a few minutes behind or had paused along the incline to catch her breath, but the weather was growing increasingly dreary. A light fog was creeping in. Daylight was starting to fade fast. She waited, scanning the thinning crowds of visitors for any sign of Susan. As the minutes ticked by, an uneasy feeling set in. By around 6 in the evening, with dusk actively settling and still absolutely no sign of her mother, that unease turned to total panic. Desperate to find Susan, her daughter decided to retrace their steps down the Forney Ridge Trail. She headed back into the dense woods, calling out for her mom and hurrying to the exact spot where they had last been together. The trail was growing incredibly dim. A quiet enveloped the forest, swallowed by the foggy clouds that so often shroud Clingman's Dome in the evenings. There was no trace of Susan on the path, no answers to her daughter's shouts except the muffled sounds of the wilderness. Fearing that something was terribly wrong, Susan's daughter rushed back and alerted the park authorities that her mother was missing. By now, it was full night in the mountains. Temperatures were dropping rapidly, and a light rain had begun to fall over the entire area. Thus began one of the most extensive search operations in the history of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Park rangers immediately organized search teams despite the treacherous conditions. You have to realize, Clingman's Dome sits at around 6,600 feet, and that night, the mountain was cloaked in absolute darkness and dense cloud cover. Visibility was near zero in some spots. Any hope of quickly finding Susan that first night was completely hindered by the foggy, rainy weather and the rugged terrain. The few hikers and tourists still in the vicinity were questioned, but none had seen the missing woman. The searchers faced a long, anxious night on the mountain. They knew the odds of locating a lost hiker in those specific conditions were slim until daylight arrived. By first light on September 26th, the search effort exploded in size. The National Park Service called in resources from far and wide. Eventually, around 175 trained personnel from numerous agencies and rescue organizations across multiple states joined the mission to find Susan Clements. They set up a command post right at the Clingman's Dome parking area, which was completely closed off to the public so search crews could work entirely unimpeded. Teams of rangers, volunteer ground searchers, K-9 units, and personnel equipped with helicopters and drones spread out over the rugged landscape. In the initial days, searchers hiked an estimated 500 miles of trails, repeatedly sweeping the routes surrounding Clingman's Dome. When those efforts yielded absolutely no sign of Susan, they turned to bushwhacking, desperate, final attempt to locate any trace of her. The terrain was completely unforgiving. The Smokies are notorious for dense undergrowth, and over the next several days, the park was drenched with up to 3 inches of rain. The weather became unseasonably cold, factors which severely hindered the grueling bushwhacking operation. Then, on the afternoon of October 2nd, 2018, 7 full days after Susan disappeared, search came to a tragic end. In a tangle of thick vegetation by a cold, trickling creek about 2 miles west of the parking area, the body of Susan Clements was found. She was lying on her back in the creek bed amid the rocks and rhododendron. The location was in extremely rugged terrain, roughly 3/4 of a mile off the Appalachian Trail. To put this into perspective, it was so incredibly inaccessible that a Black Hawk helicopter had to be brought in just to airlift her remains out of the area. In the following weeks, investigators worked tirelessly to piece together what had actually happened during the time Susan was missing. In April 2019, the Swain County Medical Examiner's Office in North Carolina released the official autopsy report. Susan had died of complications of hypothermia due to exposure to adverse environmental conditions, with dehydration listed as a contributing factor. The autopsy noted a striking, deeply disturbing detail. Susan had exhibited clear signs of paradoxical undressing. She had removed articles of clothing despite the freezing cold, which is a common late-stage symptom of hypothermia-induced confusion. Apart from scratches and minor abrasions, her body showed no significant injuries and absolutely no evidence of foul play. There were no indications of an attack by animals or other people. Her death was officially ruled accidental. But even with these apparent answers, a haunting question lingered. How did an experienced hiker get so completely lost in such a short span of time, in an area that earlier in the day had been filled with visitors? One theory is that it was simply a tragic navigational mistake. Perhaps, as Susan continued toward the parking area, she missed a critical intersection. Not far from the Klingman's Dome parking lot, the Forney Ridge Trail meets another path which leads to the Appalachian Trail in the Dome parking area. It is entirely possible that in the thick fog, Susan walked right past the trail that led directly to the parking lot. If she mistakenly continued straight, she would have found herself on the Appalachian Trail heading away from Klingman's Dome. In the low visibility and rain, she may not have realized the error until she was well beyond the intended turn. If Susan indeed took a wrong turn and unknowingly ventured onto the Appalachian Trail, she may have continued walking for some time, expecting to find the parking area around each bend. At some point, she likely understood that she was not on the right path. In that panicked state, with night falling fast, Susan could have attempted to find her own way out. This leads to another aspect of lost hiker behavior that is well known and documented, but is not fully understood from a psychological standpoint. Often, disoriented hikers will head downhill or toward water in hopes of finding a road or help. The logic is generally believed to be that finding a stream downhill might eventually lead to a path to civilization. Susan's final location suggests she may have done exactly this. Once off the established trail and moving downhill through the trackless forest, she would have been in very perilous terrain. Thick vegetation can look completely impenetrable at eye level, and steep slopes in the Smokies are slick, strewn with roots and rocks. It is easy to get injured or completely exhausted in such conditions, a fact which is doubly true with night falling. Another possible theory involves a physical injury or an unforeseen medical emergency. The idea here is that she may have tripped and suffered a minor concussion which disoriented her. Now, the subsequent investigation did not report finding significant head trauma. However, a very mild concussion would be both invisible and also potentially enough to make her act entirely out of character, even if only for a brief period. During this brief time, it is speculated that she may have gone off the trail and then become further disoriented, leading to her tragic end. Many have also speculated that there may have been an element of foul play involved in driving Susan off the trail. While Susan clearly did not perish directly due to foul play, this theory does not claim that it actually might even be more terrifying. Rather, the thought is that someone may have simply menaced her off the trail, forcing her to flee into the dense woodland. Once she was off the path, the perpetrator could have stalked her to force her deeper into the woods before ultimately leaving her to perish. This theory is highly speculative, but it has gained significant traction amongst those who have noticed a pattern of disturbing activities in national parks.
Story time.
The case begins back in 1986 in a corner of Alabama that looks exactly like a postcard. Well, until it doesn't. Marshall County is tucked into the northeastern pocket of the state, a place where the earth swells into ridges before flattening out completely as it approaches the Tennessee River. Right on the lip of Guntersville Lake, you find Georgia Mountain. It is a punishing stretch of land, dense woods, jagged rock, and, honestly, zero ambient light once the sun goes down. This is where Wanda Jean Mays spent what should have been just another unremarkable night in May. Actually, it was the very last night anyone could definitively prove she was alive. Wanda was 26 years old. She had spent her life moving between Alabama and Arkansas, eventually graduating from Arab High School and later earning her credentials from Wallace State College. By 1986, she had built a real life for herself, securing a secretarial position at Redstone Arsenal. That is a major federal military installation over in Huntsville. It meant stability. She had a career, a set routine, and people who noticed the exact moment she failed to show up. Her family always described her as incredibly warm, deeply social. No known enemies, no criminal record. There was absolutely nothing in her history that hinted at the violence to come, except there was one detail. In the years leading up to her disappearance, Wanda dealt with what her medical records and family described as a documented chemical imbalance. It was a severe medical condition. On at least 2 distinct occasions, this imbalance triggered profound anxiety episodes, moments of sheer blinding panic where she felt an overwhelming compulsion to just flee and hide. Her doctors knew it. Her family knew it too. It had not stopped her from building a life, but it was there, lurking in the background, and it would matter. Massive importance later on. On the evening of May 11th, 1986, Wanda sat down for dinner with her parents, Jim and Dot Mays, at a restaurant just a few miles from the water. After they finished, instead of heading back to her own apartment, she decided to drop by the home of her aunt and uncle, Tyrus and Betty Dorman Sr. They lived right up on Georgia Mountain, hugging the very edge of Guntersville Lake. She pulled up around 10:30 that night. Everything seemed completely normal. She said her goodnights, walked into the guest room, and closed the door. That was it. That was the absolute last time anyone saw Wanda Jean Mays. The following morning, May 12th, Tyrus and Betty Dorman walked into a nightmare that defied any simple explanation. The guest room stood empty. The bed, completely untouched. Nobody had slept in it. More confusingly, Wanda's purse and her keys were still resting right there on the nightstand, exactly where she had placed them. She had no vehicle at the house, no logical way to leave the property. Then comes the detail that changes everything. The bedroom window was shattered. Not from someone trying to force their way in from the outside, mind you, but from the inside out. There was no glass on the exterior sill whatsoever. Instead, the frame was heavily smeared with blood. That alone would terrify any family, right? But what they uncovered next escalated the situation entirely. Down on the boat dock behind the house, right at the water's edge of Guntersville Lake, they found Wanda's nightgown, torn, bloody, and floating out on the undulating surface of the lake itself was a canoe, completely empty, drifting aimlessly, and also stained with blood. No body in the water, no physical trail leading away from the dock, no footprints to track. Just blood in 3 distinct, disconnected locations: the window frame, the dock, and the canoe. Then, silence. It was like she simply dissolved into the geography. Naturally, the ensuing investigation was incredibly intense. The bizarre nature of the case captured national headlines almost overnight. There was just too much physical evidence pointing directly toward a violent encounter, a deliberate act, yet there was no body, no suspect, and 0 explanations that could connect all 3 blood pools logically. Marshall County law enforcement threw everything they had into a full-scale investigation. The mystery was so baffling that it was profiled on the national television show Unsolved Mysteries, not just once, but twice, starting in 1987. A veteran homicide investigator, Edward Teal, was brought in to dissect the files, and he openly called it the single most mysterious case of his entire career. Meanwhile, sightings started trickling in almost immediately. The very morning after she vanished, a local resident claimed to see a young woman matching Wanda's description walking along Alabama State Route 62 near Guntersville. She was wearing oversized jeans, her hair completely soaked, looking like she had just been swimming. 2 days later, 30 miles away in Huntsville, a convenience store patron claimed she spotted Wanda in the back seat of a vehicle flanked by 2 unidentified men. The witness stated the woman looked absolutely terrified. When the witness walked outside, she saw her again, standing at a payphone next to one of those same men. The witness was completely convinced it was Wanda. These 2 leads sent investigators chasing ghosts. The theory that Wanda had been abducted, snatched by force, and held captive by unknown men hardened into the definitive narrative. For decades, her family clung to this. They believed she was out there, alive, trapped. They never stopped looking. But here is the problem. The blood at the window, the dock, and the canoe never fit the kidnapping theory. If an abductor grabbed her from the house, why go to the dock? Why bleed on a canoe that was left to drift? If she was taken away in a vehicle, why was there a trail of blood suggesting she moved entirely through the property before ever reaching a road? It made no sense. The leads dried up. The investigation stalled out completely. Years rolled into decades. Tragically, the Dorman family, Wanda's own aunt and uncle, become targets of intense local suspicion. Whispers, neighborhood accusations, the brutal community blame that naturally glues itself to the last people seen near a victim. No charges were ever filed, because there was no evidence, but the cloud never lifted. Then, the case takes a sharp, quiet turn. Not with a dramatic confession, but with an accidental discovery. It is October 2003, 17 years after Wanda vanished. A man is hiking through the dense woods behind the old Dorman property, searching for wild ginseng plants. He crests a ridge on Kalikee Road in Guntersville. looks down into a ravine at the base of a 150-foot cliff, roughly 1.8 miles from the house, and sees human skeletal remains. The bones remained unidentified for years. Finally, in January 2008, the FBI's DNA laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, confirmed what the brutal landscape had been whispering all along. Those bones belonged to Wanda Jean Mays. She had never left the mountain. Marshall County Sheriff Scott Walls called a press conference to deliver the finality. The investigation was officially closed. Wanda, driven by that documented chemical imbalance, had broken out of the house on her own accord. She had stumbled into the pitch-black woods behind the property, lost her footing in the dark, and plunged off the cliff. It was a tragic, accidental death. No foul play, no mysterious captors. The family members who spent over 2 decades under a suffocating cloud of suspicion were finally publicly cleared. The state's official conclusion is that she walked nearly 2 miles through unforgiving rocky mountain terrain in the dead of night, entirely alone, barefoot or poorly clothed, without her money or her keys, driven entirely by the psychological storm inside her head, and fell. It is an explanation that fits her medical history, matches the geography, and explains why her remains were found exactly in that trajectory. It is the most logical conclusion. The law says accidental death. But you know, the blood of the window, the blood of the dock, the blood of the canoe drifting out in Guntersville Lake, none of that is explained by a woman walking north into the deep woods. Her body was found 1.8 miles in the exact opposite direction of that lake. The 2 sightings, the wet-haired woman on Route 62 and the terrified girl at the Huntsville payphone, were eventually confirmed to be completely false, officially dismissed. But for 22 years, those false leads kept the world looking everywhere except that mountain. A ginseng hunter steps over a ridge in 2003 and finds what 2 decades of professional searches missed. The cliff was there the entire time. The answer was less than 2 miles from the back door. She finally got her answer, even if it arrived 22 years too late. But the next person on this list, they never did. He was only supposed to be gone for a few short hours.
Story time.
St. Clair County sits in the northeastern part of Alabama, east of Birmingham, in a stretch of the state where the land begins to fold and rise toward the Appalachian foothills. It is a county of small communities. Pell City, Moody, Odenville, and dozens of smaller settlements connected by winding county roads that snake through pine forests, past cattle pastures, and between properties spaced far enough apart that neighbors are not always visible from each other's windows. Chula Vista is one of those smaller communities. Sits in the rural interior of the county, along roads that do not appear on most tourist maps, in the kind of landscape where a January night is genuinely dark. It is the kind of dark that has no ambient glow from a city on the horizon, just trees, the road, an occasional porch light, and where the distance between one house and another can feel absolutely enormous. It is the kind of place where you know the people you know, you trust the people you trust, and where getting into a car with someone on a winter night is not by itself alarming. People in rural community move around that way. They give each other rides, they cover short distances between houses, neighborhoods, and properties. They get in cars. Kyla Bobo was 32 years old on January 30th, 2022. She had been born on September 28, 1989, and by the time of her disappearance, she was staying temporarily with 2 female friends at a residence on Cane Creek Drive in Chula Vista. It was not her permanent home, but a place she was staying in the way that people in close-knit communities sometimes move between residences for stretches of time. She had a boyfriend in the area, not at the same house, but nearby, reachable by a short drive on the county roads that thread through that part of St. Clair County. That proximity, the short distance between where she was staying and where her boyfriend lived, is one of the central facts of this case. It is the exact gap inside which Kyla Bobo disappeared, and inside which she spent 22 months before her family received any kind of answer. On the night of January 30th, 2022, between 9 and 10 o'clock in the evening, Kyla was picked up from the Cane Creek Drive residence by an unidentified male. The specific identity of that individual, his name, his relationship to Kyla, how he came to be at that address on that particular Sunday night, has not been publicly disclosed by investigators in any detail. That is part of the available public record. What is known publicly is that he was there, that Kyla got into his vehicle, and that he later claimed to authorities that he had driven her straight to her boyfriend's house and dropped her off. Her boyfriend told authorities she never arrived. Between the moment Kyla got into that car on Cane Creek Drive and the moment she was supposed to walk through her boyfriend's door, she vanished. She was not seen or heard from that night. She was not seen or heard from the next day. She was not seen or heard from in the weeks and months that followed. Here is the critical detail that sits at the center of this case, and it admits absolutely no innocent explanation. The driver made a specific claim. He drove her somewhere, he dropped her off, and she got out of the car. The boyfriend's account is that she never appeared. One of those accounts is false. Either she was dropped somewhere other than where the driver claimed, or she was not dropped at all. Either she got out of that car somewhere on a rural St. Clair County road on a freezing January night and something happened to her in the gap before she reached her destination, or she never left that car under her own power. There is no version of events in which both accounts are true. The St. Clair County Sheriff's Criminal Investigation Division described the case as complex from the very outset and declined to release further details during the active missing persons phase. That word, complex, is doing significant work in a case with this structure. Complex, in the context of a missing woman and a driver whose account directly contradicts the known facts of her destination, is the precise language investigators use when they have a working theory they are simply not yet prepared to state publicly. The months that followed Kyla's disappearance were quiet in the specific way that cases with ongoing, active investigations are quiet. It wasn't the absence of work, but rather the deliberate management of public information. The St. Clair County Sheriff's Office Criminal Investigation Division continued to investigate. Regional outlets, including the Trussville Tribune, covered her disappearance and kept it in public view. The Disappeared blog documented her case and maintained regular updates for the community of people following it. The family waited. The people who had known Kyla waited. The months accumulated. 1, then 3, then 6, then 12. The case remained officially classified as complex, the details remained undisclosed, and the driver's account remained the vast known fact about where Kyla had gone. The weight of that waiting is something that is easy to pass over quickly in a purely factual recitation. 22 months is not an administrative window, it is not a processing delay. It is the length of time that a family spent completely not knowing whether someone they loved was alive, not knowing where she was, or not knowing what had happened on that Sunday night in January on a rural road in St. Clair County. It is the length of time a community that knew Kyla carried an unanswered question that no one in authority was answering. It is 670 days of getting up and going to bed without knowing. That is what 22 months truly means in the context of a missing person. In November 2023, 22 months after Kyla was picked up from Cane Creek Drive, her remains were found. The specific location of the discovery and the exact circumstances under which she was recovered have not been fully disclosed in the public reporting available at the time this account was prepared. What is confirmed is that her remains were located in November 2023, and that in March 2024, an arrest was finally made in connection with her death. The legal proceedings that followed that arrest were still ongoing at the time this account was prepared, and the full details of the charges and the specific allegations have not been fully adjudicated. They are not presented here as settled fact. What can be said is that someone has been placed in a courtroom in connection with what happened to Kyla Bobo, and that the 22 months of public silence eventually produced a formal legal response. There is something specific about the geography of rural St. Clair County that is worth naming directly, because it shapes every single element of what happened to Kyla and why the case unfolded the way it did. The county roads that connect small communities like Chula Vista do not have traffic cameras. They do not have streetlights. In most stretches, they are not monitored by any system that would have recorded a specific vehicle traveling a specific route at a specific time. On a Sunday evening in January in a major metropolitan area, a car ride between two residential addresses might pass through dozens of camera fields, business parking lots, traffic intersections, convenience store exteriors, or residential doorbell cameras mounted on houses every 50 feet. In rural St. Clair County in January 2022, a car could travel miles between two known points and leave no visual record at all. That absence of infrastructure is not unique to this case. It appeared in Shannon Palmer's case, in Heavenly Ross's case, and in Robert Chilvers's case. Rural Alabama has a geography that swallows certain kinds of evidence, and the cases that fall into that geography tend to stay cold longer and resolve harder than cases in places where every movement is recorded. Kyla's case ultimately moved to an arrest, but the 22 months it took to get there are, in significant part, a consequence of that landscape and what it conceals. Think about the geometry of what happened on January 30th, 2022. Kyla was at a house on Cane Creek Drive. She was going to another house nearby. The distance between those 2 points was short, the kind of drive that takes mere minutes on rural county roads. Someone drove her. She did not arrive. The driver told a story that the investigation eventually rejected. Everything that happened to Kyla Bobo happened inside the small, dark space of a car ride on a cold January night, between 2 points that were not far apart, on roads that people of St. Clair County drive every single day without a second thought. She got into a car. She did not get out where she was supposed to. It was supposed to be a short ride home on a January night. The car stopped somewhere. She did not. Kyla's case moved to an arrest.
Story time.
In 1999, 6 people vanished into thin air together, and today only one of them is still missing. There is a small, unassuming nightclub in Opp, Alabama called The Hideaway. It is located down in Covington County, deep in the southern belly of the state, long way from any place that ever makes national headlines. Opp is just a small town, a few thousand residents, a prominent water tower, and a main street that loops back on itself. It is exactly the kind of tight-knit place where you either know absolutely everyone, or you are only one person away from a connection. Friday nights in Opp follow a specific, generational rhythm. People gather, they socialize, they drive. The rural roads cutting out of town are flat, pitch black, and bordered by endless walls of pine trees. They stretch out for miles before they connect to anything resembling a city. On the evening of May 7, 1999, 6 close friends met up to enjoy one of those classic Friday nights. They grabbed dinner together, they talked. They eventually pointed Lamar's car toward the Hideaway. By all indications, the start of the evening was entirely ordinary. It was the exact kind of weekend routine that plays out across small southern towns every single week without a second thought. It was so normal that nobody would have ever tried to piece the timeline back together later on because, well, why would they? Usually everyone goes home, the night ends. Except this night didn't end. The 6 friends were all in their mid to late 20s, most of them called Enterprise, Alabama home. That is a city about 25 miles northeast of Opp, right along US Highway 84. Enterprise is a bit larger, a military town anchored by Fort Rucker, possessing the kind of heavy infrastructure you expect near a major army base. The 6 individuals who met up that Friday were deeply woven into the social fabric of the community. They had young children, stable jobs, apartments, extended families, the ordinary, daily ties that keep a person grounded. Valerie McCoy was 27 years old, a devoted wife and a mother to 5 children, the youngest just 3 and the oldest 12. She was the first cousin of Eula Josette Lee, who was 28 and raising 2 kids of her own while living in Enterprise. Joining them were Angela, Tamara, and Lamar Stackhouse. Lamar owned the ride for the night, a 1989 Burgundy Chevrolet Caprice. That car was a massive, full-sized American sedan built precisely for these kinds of highway cruises. Heavy enough to feel safe on dark, single-lane Alabama roads, with plenty of room for a big group. Lamar was behind the wheel. And finally, there was James Reynolds, though everyone in town just called him Amp. He was in his late 20s, laid back, easygoing, the kind of guy whose presence at a party was just a given. 6 friends, 1 big car, a Friday night, and a nightclub sitting just 8 miles away. The evening put itself together seamlessly. Tamara made sure her infant daughter was cared for, dropping her off with a cousin in Enterprise near Lamar's place, before meeting up with the other women at Eula's apartment. From there, the group converged at Lamar's house on West Hildreth Avenue. By the time the entire group assembled, it was late evening. When they finally piled into that Burgundy Caprice and hit the 2-lane highway heading south toward Opp, it was deep into the night. The Hideaway was the destination. They arrived, parked, and went through the doors. They spent the next several hours doing exactly what people do: drinking, listening to music, talking, enjoying the comfort of familiar faces. Multiple people saw them inside the club that night. Witnesses distinctly remembered them, and that detail is crucial because it gives investigators one solid, undeniable anchor before the facts completely vanish. Here is the final, authenticated moment where all 6 of them are known to be alive. Witnesses leaving the Hideaway Club in the early morning hours of May 8, 1999, watched the 6 friends walk out together, pile into Lamar Stackhouse's burgundy Caprice, and drive out of the parking lot. The sedan pulled onto the dark highway and disappeared into the night. That is it. That is the absolute last time anyone ever saw them. No one got a phone call say they made it home safely. No one answered the door the next morning. Those 6 people drove out of that gravel lot and straight into a deafening silence that lasted for months. Within days, terrified families began filing missing persons reports. The Alabama Bureau of Investigation stepped in to take the lead. Search operations exploded across the region. Ground sweeps, dive teams, aerial road searches. Eventually, a reward fund climbed to $20,000. Weeks dragged into months. The blistering summer of 1999 blanketed Covington County with that heavy, suffocating southern heat, and still, nothing turned up. No car, no cell phone pings, no sightings. Just nothing. Think about the scale of that. 6 adults from the same small community, vanishing simultaneously without a single trace. It should have dominated national news cycles for years. Instead, the strange, quiet apathy surrounding the disappearance remains one of its most haunting elements. This is where the unique geography of Deep South Alabama becomes the central player in this mystery, because it was the landscape itself that finally forced an answer, even if it wasn't the one anyone was praying for. Opp sits right near the Pea River, a murky waterway that twists through Covington County on a slow, muddy path down toward the Florida Panhandle. Roughly 8 miles outside of town, that river cuts underneath Ballard Bridge along a remote stretch of rural road. It is a typical country crossing, a low concrete bridge spanning dark, moving water completely unlit at night, with 0 guardrails heavy enough to stop a speeding vehicle. When you approach Ballard Bridge in the dark, the river is entirely invisible until your headlights hit the water. During the wet seasons, the Pea River runs incredibly deep and fast. But during a dry summer, the water table drops, and whatever is hiding on the riverbed starts to show itself. The summer of 1999 was dry, exceptionally dry, according to local weather records. By September, the Pea River had receded dramatically from its high marks in May. And right there, in September of 1999, 4 months after those 6 friends drove away from the hideaway, law enforcement spotted something. Submerged in the water, roughly 50 feet from Ballard Bridge, was Lamar Stackhouse's burgundy 1989 Chevrolet Caprice. The car had been resting there the entire time, just 8 miles from the nightclub. The river had swallowed it whole, hiding it deep enough that every early sonar and visual search missed it completely. The answer was sitting right there underwater for 4 long months. While families wept, investigators knocked on doors, and that $20,000 reward sat untouched. The water lines dropped, the roof of the car appeared, and for a fleeting second, people thought the worst part of this nightmare was over. It wasn't. Actually, it was just beginning. This is where the case fractures into something deeply disturbing. Divers recovered 5 sets of human remains from the submerged vehicle and the immediate surrounding water. Forensic testing confirmed the grim reality. They had found 5 of the 6 friends, Valerie, Eula, Angela, Tamara, and Lamar, who was still positioned behind the steering wheel. 5 families got the devastating phone call they had been dreading, but at least they had closure. They had remains to bring home, a body to bury, a place to mark with a stone. But one person was missing. James Amp Reynolds was not inside that car. His remains were not recovered from the vehicle, nor were they anywhere in the surrounding river. Searchers did find a dark jacket floating nearby that might have belonged to him, but it was never definitively proven. Aside from that one unverified piece of clothing, there was absolutely nothing. No body, no bone, no biological trace. But here is the detail that has kept this case open and agonizing for more than 25 years. It wasn't just that his body had drifted away downriver. Forensic experts who meticulously examined the recovered Chevy Caprice in the crash site explicitly stated that there was no physical evidence to indicate Amp Reynolds was ever inside that vehicle when it plunged into the water. Let me clarify that. It wasn't that the evidence was destroyed or inconclusive. The official forensic finding was that the physical data simply did not support his presence in the car at the time of the crash. Think about that. Multiple eyewitnesses watched him climb into that exact sedan at the Hideaway Club. He was in the car and it pulled out of the parking lot. Yet, according to the science, he wasn't in it when it hit the P River. The question that has haunted this community for a quarter of a century is basic, yet terrifying. What happened to Amp Reynolds on that short, 8-mile stretch of country road between the Hideaway Club and Ballard Bridge? Did that burgundy sedan pull over in the dark? Did he get out voluntarily, or was he forced out? Did something violent happen in the pitch-black space between the club and the bridge, something that has been kept a secret for over 2 decades? There are 0 public answers to these questions. They are the heavy questions Amp's family has been forced to carry alone. And they are the questions that authorities, by ruling the crash a simple traffic accident and halting the active investigation, essentially chose to ignore. Police repeatedly stated that foul play was not suspected, stance that Amp's family and the local community intensely, aggressively disputed. The state's official narrative was that the vehicle simply drifted off the road, plunged into the river, and the tragedy ended there. But the total absence of Amp from the physical wreckage has never been reconciled with the eyewitnesses who saw him leave in that car. A formal recovery effort dragged through the rest of 1999 and into the next year, but it was officially called off on July 11, 2000. No resolution, no satisfying explanation for the people who loved him. Today, James Amp Reynolds remains officially classified as an involuntary missing person in both the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency database and the NamUs National Missing Persons Registry. More than 2 decades after the disappearance, an Alabama cold case advocacy group featured his mystery on episode 6 of their documentary series Forgotten. The reward remains completely unclaimed. The search is over. The P River, which surrendered 5 clear answers when the water receded in 1999, has stubbornly refused to give up the 6th. 5 families received a body to bury. 1 family got a missing person poster, and a search that was quietly shut down on a Tuesday afternoon in July. No body, no answers, no explanation for how a man can get into a car but vanish completely before that car hits the water.
Story time.
Derek Lucking. On a crisp, cold March morning in 2012, a white Ford Escape sat completely abandoned at the newfound gap overlook in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. It was a silent, unmoving witness to an unfolding mystery. Its owner, 24-year-old Derek Lucking, had vanished directly into the dense wilderness before dawn. Derek was, by absolutely all accounts, a highly responsible young man and a recent college graduate. But that day, he was simply nowhere to be found. Inside his locked vehicle lay one incredibly eerie clue. A handwritten note that explicitly read, "Do not come find me." Derek lived in Louisville, Tennessee, not far from the majestic Smokies. In the restless weeks leading right up to his sudden disappearance, he had been increasingly unhappy with the general direction of his life. Close family members had noticed he was definitely not acting like himself. He grew noticeably withdrawn. He even picked up some highly uncharacteristic habits like heavily drinking and smoking. These were certainly small red flags, but nothing to genuinely suggest what was about to happen. On Wednesday, March 14, 2012, Derek left his home completely unexpectedly sometime during the dark of the night. The very next morning, he failed to show up for his job. His roommate awoke, found Derek's alarm clock aggressively ringing in an empty room, and instantly knew something was wrong. Calls to Derek's cell phone went completely unanswered. Deeply alarmed, the roommate immediately contacted Derek's parents in Virginia. They began a frantic, panicked overnight drive to Tennessee to search for their missing son. When Derek's parents finally arrived and desperately checked his computer for digital clues, they discovered he had been actively researching Great Smoky Mountains National Park. More tellingly, he had formally reserved a hotel room for the specific night of March 16th in Cherokee, North Carolina, right outside the park boundaries. Clinging to absolutely any hope, his parents headed straight toward Cherokee, thinking they might somehow intercept him there. Early on Saturday, March 17th, standard surveillance cameras at a modest motel in Cherokee captured Derek right in the lobby. Around 4 in the morning, he formally checked out, and he walked out into the pre-dawn darkness carrying a very small day pack. This was the absolute last confirmed sighting of him. When his parents breathlessly reached the hotel later that morning, they learned they had just barely missed Derek. Inside the exact room he had just left, they found a Bible resting on the bed, and an empty liquor bottle sitting on the floor. Objects that strongly hinted at a deep personal crisis during his final, solitary night. Shortly afterward, as Derek's family drove back through the winding roads of the park, they suddenly spotted his white Ford Escape. It was parked at Newfound Gap, a highly scenic pass right on the Tennessee and North Carolina state line. The car was totally empty. Fearing the absolute worst, but determined to find him, they alerted park rangers immediately. Investigator carefully opened the vehicle and discovered an entire assortment of newly purchased camping gear and outdoor supplies sitting inside. Derek had clearly been preparing for a massive outdoor excursion. There was a tent, a sleeping bag, tools, detailed maps, food rations, and a comprehensive survival guide. Strangely, though, all that vital equipment was left completely behind in the car. Derek had not taken the tent, the warm sleeping bag, and most of the life-saving supplies with him. He took only what he could physically fit in his small pack. His wallet, his identification cards, and his cash were also left sitting right in the vehicle, and resting ominously on the dashboard was that handwritten note, "Do not come find me." It now seemed undeniable that Derek had walked directly into the woods of his own accord, for reasons entirely unknown. Park rangers and experienced search teams sprang into rapid action as soon as Derek was officially reported missing. The park was actually quite busy with visitors that specific day, yet absolutely no one remembered seeing a hiker matching Derek's exact description on that clear spring morning. He had somehow slipped away unseen. Searchers initially combed the very popular trails originating from Newfound Gap, calling his name and desperately looking for any sign of him. When that yielded absolutely nothing, they pushed hard into the rugged, dangerous woods off the designated trails. For days, massive teams of rangers, dedicated volunteers, and trained search dogs scoured the steep ridges and the treacherous creek valleys near where the car was initially found. They looked for muddy footprints, scraps of torn clothing, or literally any other clue, but they found none. Derek had only a very light day pack with him, and he was absolutely not an experienced outdoorsman, a fact which made his situation even more incredibly precarious. After about a full week of intense, grueling searching, not a single trace of him turned up. As the painful days passed with no results, the official search was eventually scaled back. Derek had effectively vanished without a single, solitary trace. In the stark absence of answers, a few key theories have been put forward to try to explain what might have actually happened to Derek Lucking. One dominant theory is that Derek fully intended to vanish completely on his own and start a brand new life. The note he left, "Do not come find me," strongly suggests he absolutely did not want to be located. Perhaps he was simply overwhelmed by his current life and saw total escape as the only viable answer. It is highly possible he carefully staged his hike into the Smokies as a brilliant diversion, then quietly slipped away from the general area, deliberately abandoning his car and his legal identification. He effectively shed his old identity like a second skin. "My team no lonely, my hoked would not yields fire team yet. A greater believe Catsily test. Well, so many to stop my need, or is not at his death a Oakingland." And of course, no, the writing Delvoy Delaron, he's not having to much this, meanings like we're trying got out to match what? Of what as we call my god.
Why will Modes I'm right? The second fact that Skami Pelrahu toward another beyond unspreading on the flicker.
No actual evidence has surfaced that he resettled somewhere else. He could have theoretically managed to stay completely off the grid. Another deeply tragic theory is that Derek was in a highly disturbed state of mind and went into the vast wilderness fully intending not to ever return. He had been visibly struggling emotionally, and the timing of his sudden disappearance reportedly coincided closely with the anniversary of his beloved grandfather's death. The Bible and the empty liquor bottle left in his hotel room strongly suggest he might have been violently wrestling with despair, or perhaps seeking liquid courage before venturing out into the freezing dark. In this grim scenario, his disappearance was just a tragic accident. He fatally underestimated the sheer power of the wilderness, and nature simply hid all physical traces of what happened. A final, darker theory is that Derek encountered sudden danger in the form of another person. Some have naturally speculated he could have accidentally stumbled upon an illicit criminal activity, or met someone with highly malicious intentions deep in the woods. Of course, this is entirely possible, but ultimately, absolutely no evidence whatsoever supports this idea. There were zero signs of a violent struggle or theft at his car, and all of his valuables were left completely untouched. No witness reports or anonymous leads have ever pointed to any crime whatsoever. Without any concrete physical clues suggesting foul play, investigators rightfully consider this the absolute least likely explanation. Though, in a case like this, it obviously cannot be completely ruled out. More than a full decade has now passed since Derek Lucking walked out into the cold Smoky Mountains and completely vanished, and no trace of him has ever been found. His family has never stopped seeking answers, and the case remains open.
Story time.
On a deceptively quiet afternoon, September 25th, 1981, profoundly disturbing tragedy struck the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the dense canopy of trees. 58-year-old Polly Melton was hiking along the Deep Creek Trail with two of her close friends. Polly, well, she was moving a bit slower than her usual pace that day. This naturally prompted some playful teasing from her companions. Polly was absolutely not about to take this gentle ribbing lying down. She decided right then and there to prove to her friends that she still had plenty of athletic vigor left in her. She jogged ahead, just propelled herself forward on the easy, familiar dirt path. She rounded a gentle bend, disappearing completely over a small hill. Basically, it was all in good fun. Or, so it seemed at the time. But when Polly's friends crested that very same rise just moments later, nothing. She was gone, over a hill and out of sight. Polly Melton had vanished without a single trace. At first, her friends just assumed she must have jogged on back to their camp. They really did not initially think much of this sudden disappearance. I mean, after all, they had just been teasing her about how slow she was moved that day. Perhaps she simply wanted to get back in absolute record time to prove a point. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon when they finally reached the Deep Creek campground. This was where Polly and her husband were staying. They fully expected to find Polly there, relaxing at their campsite after the long hike. Instead, they found only Polly's husband. Bob Melton was waiting quietly inside the Airstream trailer, and he had not seen Polly at all. Bob, who was 20 years Polly's senior and in somewhat frail health, had opted to stay behind that afternoon. He assumed the women were just out enjoying a much longer hike. When Polly's friends arrived without her, panic set in immediately. The group frantically retraced their steps, calling out Polly's name, searching up and down the entirety of the trail. Other hikers on the Deep Creek Trail were stopped and desperately asked if they had seen a tall woman wearing a pink sleeveless blouse. No one had. After nearly 2 grueling hours of frantic searching on their own, Polly's friends and her husband knew something was terribly wrong. They officially contacted park rangers around 6 in the evening, reporting Polly Melton missing. Rangers and local authorities sprang into immediate action. That evening, the Deep Creek Trail, normally a highly popular, easy path located near the North Carolina and Tennessee border of the park, was entirely closed to the public as search teams poured in. Over the course of the next week, more than 150 dedicated volunteers combed the dense woods. They were assisted by park rangers, local law enforcement, and highly trained search dogs. These searchers systematically scoured miles of trails, thick forest underbrush, and the muddy banks of Deep Creek itself, looking for anything, any sign of Polly. Helicopters continuously buzzed overhead, horse-mounted searchers patrolled the most remote, jagged areas of the park. For 4 days straight, teams methodically covered the exact area where Polly was last seen. And well beyond it, they found absolutely nothing. No scraps of torn clothing, no footprints leading off the main trail, no broken branches, a disturbed brush to indicate a struggle or a fall. The only real clue they got was fleeting at best. One of the bloodhounds actually caught Polly's scent on the trail, right near the specific spot where she had disappeared, beside a large downed tree where it seemed she might have briefly paused to rest. But right beyond that point, the scent trail just evaporated, completely disappeared. The canine handlers described their dogs circling the area and whining, confused, as if Polly had simply vanished into thin air. By October 2nd, 1981, after a full week of utterly fruitless effort, the official search was formally scaled back. Though the active boots-on-the-ground search had ended, the real investigation was only just beginning. Family members, close friends, and authorities were left grappling with a haunting question: what actually happened to Polly Melton? In trying to solve the dark mystery, the authorities obviously had to first understand who Polly actually was. Polly Melton was, by absolutely all accounts, a remarkably friendly, outdoorsy woman who was simply enjoying the dawn of her golden years. Born in 1923, Polly had seen a lot of life. By the time she reached her late 50s, she had unfortunately been widowed twice. But she eventually found love again with Bob Melton, an elderly man whom she married in 1975. The couple split their time between Jacksonville, Florida and the Great Smoky Mountains. During the warmer months, they spent their days living out of their 19-foot Airstream trailer. Since Polly had no children of her own, she naturally poured all of her excess energy into her deep friendships, her vibrant church community, and her dedicated volunteer work. Every single fall at the Deep Creek campground, Polly actually volunteered daily at a local senior center. She helped serve warm meals to the elderly residents. But you know, everything in her life was not just sunshine and roses. As investigators dug deeper into her past, they began to turn up some potentially groundbreaking clues. Investigators learned that Polly had been under some severe emotional strain earlier that exact same year. She was still actively grieving her mother's death from 1978. That was an event that had frankly sent her into a period of deep, agonizing depression. Friends, however, insisted that Polly seemed to be feeling much better lately. They said she was pretty much back to her cheerful self for the most part. However, the official medical record ended up telling a somewhat different story entirely. Interestingly, she had also been prescribed Valium a couple of years before, but she supposedly stopped taking it completely by 1981. Then, a chilling detail emerged. After Polly vanished, Bob discovered that an entire bottle of his own prescription Valium was utterly missing from the trailer. As the weeks and eventually months passed, several credible theories emerged as to what actually happened to Polly Melton. One major theory was that Polly simply left of her own free will, basically vanishing into a brand new life. Supporters of this specific idea pieced together a compelling narrative from those odd, disconnected clues. Perhaps Polly had been deeply unhappy in her life and quietly, methodically planned to run away. Being married to Bob, who at 78 was much older and in notoriously poor health, might have frankly left Polly feeling isolated and incredibly lonely. On the hike, when the perfect opportunity finally arose, Polly could have hurried ahead of her friends completely intentionally. Deep Creek Trail is really not very remote. In fact, it eventually leads directly near a paved road and a parking area right by the campground. Some have naturally questioned whether someone could have been waiting right there to pick her up. If Polly had a secret companion, right? A lover, perhaps? They might have used that brief, fleeting window when she was out of sight to meet her, swiftly whisking her away by car. One truly tantalizing piece of evidence gives some genuine weight to this voluntary getaway theory. In April 1982, about 6 months after Polly vanished, check made out to Thelma Pauline Melton, which was her full legal name, was cashed at a bank in Birmingham, Alabama. The check was reportedly an interest payment from one of Polly's previous investments. It was certainly not a huge sum of money, but it was absolutely enough to raise eyebrows. Investigator aggressively followed up on this lead, hoping, praying it meant Polly had finally resurfaced. Birmingham was roughly 300 miles from where she disappeared, and coincidentally, Polly had actually been born in Alabama and still had some extended relatives living there. Unfortunately, this clue led nowhere conclusive. The bank simply could not definitively prove who had physically cashed the check. The signature was indeed Polly's name, but whether it was actually her handwriting or just someone successfully forging it was completely uncertain. No additional money was ever withdrawn from Polly's personal accounts, and absolutely no sightings of her were ever confirmed in Alabama, or anywhere else for that matter. Naturally, some have heavily speculated that this had actually been one of Polly's own family members forging her signature and illegally cashing the check. Another factor I really should mention right here is the simple fact that no actual crime had been definitively committed, so it is almost certain a forensic accountant was not formally retained to fully go through her private finances. To be okay, so I'd agree, we do it. You can I'd say. That is that joking to make? Oh, well, it is always possible something critical was missed, something which perhaps proved further financial activity by Polly long after she vanished. Another prominent theory firmly considers foul play. Though, to be completely honest, it is a truly perplexing scenario given the specific circumstances. If Polly was somehow attacked or abducted out there on the trail, it would have had to happen in an extremely short window of both time and space. It would have basically had to happen in the exact moments after she went around that bend, and right before her friends caught up. Park investigators clearly noted there were absolutely no footprints or drag marks indicating someone had violently left the trail. Moreover, no suspicious strangers were reported in the area that day. That said, she was widely believed to have been wearing some very expensive jewelry at the exact time of her disappearance. To give just one specific example, she was wearing a diamond-studded gold watch. That is an item that could easily have attracted unwanted attention for someone who committed a swift crime of opportunity. There is also the very real, very tragic potential that she deliberately used Bob's missing bottle of Valium to ensure September 25th was her final day on Earth. She had experienced significant, documented depression after her mother's death. Furthermore, her husband was in increasingly poor health. Reports indicate that Bob actually had to be permanently moved to a nursing home shortly after Polly went missing. It is highly possible that the crushing weight of it all just finally broke her. She went deep into the dense woods, emptied the bottle, and was simply never found.